wanted to thank you all. For coming today. This is our 5th meeting. I think we kind of set out to have 4 to 6 meetings, and honestly, we've had 5 meetings plus our one-on-ones, plus at least some subset of you presented at the Drought Summit, and then also some subset presented on our One Water workshop at Water Congress. So we've had quite a few meetings. We got a lot of great input. Really excited to kind of round that out today. And super excited to put a draft of a final report in your inboxes today. So that'll be something I'll be working on getting out during the meeting today. We had intended to get that out yesterday, but just wanted to kind of polish up a few things. So that'll be coming to you, and then you'll have a lot of time. Jenna will speak to this in a second to kind of review and provide your input on where we got it right, where we got it wrong, or where we could strengthen things. So I'm excited to send that out to you, but mostly just super appreciative for all your time, all the great insights that you've provided. I think we've gotten just so much phenomenal feedback, and we had heard some input. I think our last meeting was pretty successful to have the presentations up front, so we're kind of copying that format again today. And I think at the request of at least one person that reached out and kind of specifically suggested, so we're incorporating that. But should be a pretty good day, and want to also thank Frank and the whole Northern team for just hosting the event there, and hopefully you'll have a fun lunch session and get to see the garden. So thanks everybody, and I will go ahead and kick things over to Jenna.
Russ, welcome to our last in-person meeting. Like Russ said, there are some proxies here. There are some guest speakers, so I just want to go around real quick and everyone can say hello. We'll start with Frank, who is hosting us today. Thank you, Frank. And Jenna Farmer's not in here, but if you see her around, thank her because she's the reason we have food and everything. So she was also amazing. So Jenna Batson from CWCB. I'll turn over to Frank.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming to our headquarters here in Berthoud. This is a temporary meeting space for the board that we're in today. As you can see, we're under construction on this campus to add some additional office space and some features. And so if there is an evacuation order, I would direct you out this door here. Also, bathrooms are up the hallway, and then we'll be having lunch up there too. It's a boxed lunch from Panera, where then we'll be directed outside to go visit the Colorado Big Thompson interpretive area, also known as our water feature, where you'll be able to get a small overview of the program and the project we run on behalf of the Bureau. And if we have time, a little tour of the conservation garden too. If there's not time, I can do that afterwards, because I know we have a lot to fit in today. And then we'll be joined by our Director of Environmental Services, Esther Vincent, and possibly Brad Wind later on. So I appreciate you making the drive up, and happy to entertain any questions. This campus is undergoing LEED certified construction. So we're at LEED Silver right now in a master site designation. And on top of that, we're elevating the landscape management protocol using what's called sustainable sites. So not just the sites component of LEED, but the actual separate and distinct sites programming. So we're really trying to push the envelope in that adoption, which will include some of the things that we adopt from the outcome of this project. So thanks, Jenna.
Frank, how many employees work here? This is a pretty big campus.
Well, total employees in Northern Water are 178, but about 40 of those are on the western slope.
Okay.
Thank you, Frank. Mark Ranger, Western Resource Advocates.
Mark Pizik, LRE Water.
Andrea Cole, Dominion Water and Sanitation District. I'm Terry Eads, Denver Parks and Rec.
Bouchon to the Mile High Flood District.
Andrea Lopez with Heat Water.
Lisa Darling with South Metro Water Supply Authority.
Muriel Miller, Fort Collins Utilities.
Hi, everybody. I'm Catherine Warvick with Colorado Springs Utilities.
Drew Beckwith, City of Westminster.
Morning, Pat McMeekin, Hartford Homes.
Doug Jevons, BBC Research and Consulting.
Paige McFarland, Centennial Water and Sanitation District.
Rick Schultz, Castle Rock Water.
Morning, everyone. Marta Curtis.
Kat Weissmiller, CWCB.
Go to the we have people online. Yeah, there's some proxies online.
So over to folks online to introduce themselves as well. Maybe we can start with Kate. You're the first one I see.
Sure. Sorry to miss you guys all in person today. I'm Kate Larson with Resource Central.
And Greg.
Greg Fisher with Denver Water.
Austin.
Austin Troy with University of Colorado, Denver.
Allison.
Allison Ebbets with Eagle River Water and Sanitation, and I am sitting in for David Norris.
Aditi?
Aditi Bhaskar, I'm at University of Colorado Boulder.
Waverly?
Hi, everyone. I'm Waverly Claw with the Sonoran Institute.
And Adam?
Adam Waters with Aurora Water in for Tim York today.
We heard from Russ, but if you'd like to say anything more, that's welcome to.
Well, just for the record, since I never say my name, Russ Sands, CWCB. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for everyone joining online. I know there's bugs flying around, so thank you. Thank you for being here anyway. Frank, if you wouldn't mind going to the slideshow. I'm going to keep it really brief. We'll talk more later. Just go over high level of what we're doing today. So as you know, we have presentations going on this morning. We have speakers in this room, which Marja will introduce. But like Russ said, we got some feedback. We've been hearing things throughout all the conversations that maybe needed a little bit more information, a little bit more background. So those are really meant to help with there. After that session, so there'll be 10 to 15-minute presentations. We'll have time for Q&A if there's discussion. If it goes long, that's okay. We have a break built in right after that, so we can lead into that a little bit. And then Doug Jevons is here with BBC Research and Consulting to go over the exploratory turf analysis refinement that has been going on in the background of all of this. And then we're going to talk about the report, talk about the editing process, what it's looking like. Like Russ said, it'll be in your inbox today. Apologies for not getting that out yesterday. It's been a process, but we're getting there, and we're excited to start getting all of your feedback and edits on there. But we'll go into that much further. And then at the end, our final of those 8 original questions, the drought resiliency and funding trends. So we'll have a presentation online, and then Russ will prep us for that. And then Marjo has questions that we'll specifically dive into. So with that, I will pass it off to Marjo to start with the presentations that will be both in person and online. So thank you all.
So we're going to start with Andrea and Mark. Frank is going to, I think, run the PowerPoint. So we'll be nodding and giving him the heads up. Around 15 minutes, I might give you the signal.
Give it a hook. Sorry, I do better if I stand, so.
Let me see if that's the other one you have up.
Well, thank you for having us. We're really glad to be here and to talk a little bit more about some of the really cool things that Dominion Water and Sanitation District has been working on, and fits really well with this task force and what you guys have been looking at.
Weird. We downloaded it earlier. It's up earlier.
There we are.
That looked right.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. So as I mentioned, my name is Andrea Cole. I'm the General Manager of Dominion Water and Sanitation District. And I would like to start just to tell you a little bit about Dominion for those that may not be familiar of who we are. Give you a little bit of background on the demand management that we've been very successful at implementing, and then turn it over to Mark Matisik, who's been helping us for quite some time on regional rainwater harvesting. So just a little bit about Dominion. So we were formed in 2004. Our service area is 33,000 acres, bordered on the north by Chatfield Reservoir, south to Wildcat Mountain, and east to Sedalia. Why the service area is so encompassing is to include not only Sterling Ranch, who is our only retail provider at this point, but also those communities like Leviers and Sedalia and Thunderbird, who are reliant on non-renewable groundwater, and in some instances, those wells are either declined in production or have declined substantially in water quality, like for the community of Leviers. So this kind of highlights where we are at Dominion. So in Douglas County, traditionally, New development is held to a standard of 0.75 acre feet per single family equivalent, which is an obnoxious amount of water. But the point of that is because everybody there is reliant on that non-renewable groundwater, they felt that that was protection for those individuals on their water supply portfolio. And so Sterling Ranch and Dominion worked quite diligently to get that demand standard reduced because they felt that that was not something that personified who they were and what they wanted to do with their community. And so they were able to get that reduced to 0.4 acre feet per single family equivalent, which was a substantial, I mean, that's over half cost savings. But the reality is that they're using far less than that. So they're down to around 0.2, even below that. They're still growing. And so the data keeps coming in, but the trend is down, substantially down on how much water they're using. So when you think about that, 0.2 acre feet per single family equivalent, that's a 70% water savings than what Douglas County requires for new development. And it is substantial. Next slide. Thank you. And so what we've taken is what I call a three-pronged stool, if you will. And so I call this, we live one water. A lot of people talk about one water. A lot of people can do components of one water, but at Dominion, we live one water. And to me, one water starts with demand management. And so we were able to effectively plan demand management with the land use to achieve those significant cost savings. We've buckled on regional rainwater harvesting to help leverage some of those flows for non-potable uses within the community. And then we'll be leveraging in return flows because all the water that we've provided to date is 100% renewable. All the water we have comes off of the South Platte currently. We have other supplies to include WISE. Our partners in WISE, we have some groundwater for firming, but all of our water is South Platte basin water. And so this just kind of highlights some of the, and I always forget that this color is very obnoxious on screens like this, so I apologize. This highlights some of what you see at Sterling Ranch. I encourage you to go out there if you haven't been out there. It's a phenomenal product, and it's not all rocks. They have grass, they have trees, they have native plants, and so they partnered with Botanic Gardens very early on and created what I call a playbook of plantings. And so they leveraged all the knowledge that Botanic Gardens has on the steppe climate that we live in and we reside in, and what kind of plants will thrive, right, with less water. They also, so if you're a resident of Sterling Ranch, if you buy a home there, you can say, well, I would like to attract birds or pollinators. I like pretty flowers. And they can flip through their playbook and pull up pages and say, these are the landscaping that you should plant at your home. The other thing that they do that helps drive down the demand at their homes is they have an indoor and outdoor meters. Every home has an indoor and outdoor meter. Every home has an indoor and outdoor water budget, and they're tiered rates. So if you stay within your water budget, good. If you go above your water budget, you're paying pretty substantially. They all use ratio meters, and so you can pull up your water usage on your smartphone. You can know exactly how much water you've used, what your bill is going to be if you project out with that water usage. That also is a good indicator. Say you're out of town and there's a leak in your house, it's going to be a good indicator of what's going on there, so you don't come home to a nasty surprise. Go on to the next slide.
Andrea, there's a question online.
Sure.
About whether Sterling Ranch's landscape playbook is publicly available.
You know, it is publicly available. I don't think it's been shared, but I can get some information on that. And to clarify, so Dominion, we're the wholesale water and wastewater provider for Sterling Ranch. Sterling Ranch has a community authority board, and they're the retail provider for the Sterling Ranch community. So that's where that information would come from. They also have a design review committee, 3 licensed landscape architects that review every plan before it's put in the ground. So they work pretty diligently on that. And then I was going to hand it over to Mark here to talk more about rainwater harvesting and some of the cool things that we're looking to do there.
Cool. So Andrea, as Andrea said, my name is Mark Chizik. I'm Ellery Water. Hold on. Big thank you to Val from Wildlife Flood District. Right after the Water Congress event you all held, I talked to her a little bit more about the project, and she was able to invite us to this opportunity, so I really appreciate that. So first of all, I just want to kind of go over a quick overview of what the rainwater harvesting pilot project is, and then I'll talk a little bit about some specifics about the project. So Sterling Ranch Rainwater Harvesting Pilot Project is the only active pilot project in the state. It's authorized by House Bill 1129. House Bill 1129 had a total of 10 pilots that were available throughout the state that essentially are to evaluate the feasibility of rainwater on a regional scale. Over the last, so the pilot program was authorized in April of 2010 for Sterling Ranch and Dominion. We've been collecting natural conditions data for over a decade to be able to support the legal right to harvest rain on a regional scale. We've also assisted the state in the development of regional factors and legal framework. That those regional factors and framework were really meant to incentivize additional pilot programs and kind of pave a way for others to take a similar path and develop rainwater on a regional scale. Next, we really have worked to finalize and develop the accounting along with the state, so that helps to support a substitute water supply plan and subsequent audit plan that allows us to legally, to be able to operate within that framework that they've defined. We are anticipating that we'll be moving forward with the water port application by the end of the year. And lastly, a big thank you to the CWCB. To date, we've acquired 3 Colorado Water Plan grants to support the program. And the most recent is a grant for the design and construction of the Sterling Gulch rainwater facility. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So the pictures you see on the screen are the Sterling Ranch's climate station. Big thank you to Northern. Originally, I talked to Mark Crookston at Northern about what that should look like, and it's pretty much identical to Northern Station. The only exception is that rain gauge is an automated weighing rain gauge. That's the only thing. And then the lower picture is a rainwater harvesting rain garden. So it's kind of pilots for as an educational piece at Sterling Ranch to help people understand the benefits. So what is rainwater and how does this actually work? So the definition right there, they produce water supplies from new impervious areas available to meet non-potable demands without injury to downstream water rights. So really it's the portion of rainwater that would have evaporated or been consumed by pre-development vegetation and never actually reached the stream system. Because rainwater historically was never a part of the water supply relied upon by downstream water users and their existing water rights, it's available legally to harvest for beneficial use. This is also known as the historical natural depletion. So you see the before and after graphic up there kind of illustrating that. It is important to note that the portion of rainwater that did historically return to the stream or groundwater system is still required to be released to protect existing downstream water rights. Slide, please. So Providence Park is the first location that we're looking to implement rainwater. Providence Park is located just to the south of Titan Road and is really the first area of the development. Currently, we've developed a 15% conceptual design of the rainwater system, and the system includes a diversion, storage, and conveyance of rainwater to meet non-potable uses. So that graphic you see, it's a rendering of what the park potentially could look like, including several different rainwater sites, a functional turf area, potentially a community supported agriculture, and then several low water use plantings, and kind of incorporating all of that into a regional park. So the system was designed to meet of the irrigation demand in the driest year. So that's an important note. Rainwater is not a firm yield, it's an average yield. And we designed it, like I said, with 20% of the demand coming from the potable system in the driest year. Lastly, rainwater system will be included in an augmentation plan along with several other water rights claims under an SWSP to prevent the injury of downstream water rights. And I think the important key takeaway here regarding the augmentation plan is that the aug plan will cover all opportunities throughout Sterling Range. And then as opportunities actually are developed and we have information on impervious surfaces and specifics around demands, that's when we'll actually move forward with an SWSP based on actual information. So this slide is really the two concepts that we're currently evaluating within Sterling Gulch. So there's one rainwater pond. I just want to make sure that's clear. But the two concepts with that rainwater pond are either a single integrated facility or a dual separated facility. The single integrated facility really includes a polishing wetland and a rainwater harvesting pond within the existing stormwater facility. So this would be additional excavation within the rainwater facility to accommodate rainwater harvesting. This option specifically is a little cheaper, but has some administrative and operational challenges. The dual separate facility is another concept we're evaluating. Diversion would be above the existing stormwater facility and diverting and conveying flows into a polishing wetland and then into a rainwater harvesting pond. This has a lot of operational administrative advantages, but it's also a little bit more expensive. So what are some benefits of rainwater harvesting capture? Rainwater is really used to offset local irrigation demands, and specifically local irrigation demands that might be met with non-renewable sources. So rainwater harvesting supports responsible development of parks and open space, including functional turf areas. Promotes and exemplifies water conservation practices within the community. It increases the availability of renewable water supplies to meet outdoor uses, and it reduces the reliance on non-renewable groundwater sources. And lastly, reduces local infrastructure requirements and system development costs and implemented as a part of the development. I think that last one's really key. And that's a big challenge that we've seen at Sterling Ranch, is that the development timeline doesn't always match the same timeline as when we would like to put these facilities in. So if we could have had the opportunity to encourage in the planning up front, I think a lot of these facilities I think this program would have been a lot more successful initially, but we're still able to get in front of some of the development. That's an important takeaway. So what's next? Like I said, we're looking forward to filing our application for water court for an augmentation plan and SWSP for rainwater harvesting within Sterling Gulch. Include several other claims, but yeah, we're just finishing up the draft report now, and hopefully we'll be able to have that submitted by the end of the year. There might be some legislative changes that we're working toward in 2024 to help us to find and clarify the integration of rainwater and stormwater uses. There's stormwater legislation out there that presents some challenges in the context of rainwater, and we'd like to clarify some of those things to make sure that there's a clear legal framework to integrate stormwater and rainwater systems. Lastly, we're continuing to advance the design and construction of a facility within Sterling Gulch, and look forward to hopefully construction starting by fall 2024. So, questions?
I remember several years ago that there was some talk or consideration of doing below ground storage for the rainwater, stormwater. Doesn't sound like that went forward. This is all open air.
Yeah, that's correct. Initially, cisterns were evaluated to help capture some of the rainwater. The challenges with that, one, we live in Colorado. And so with the expansive soils, it's pretty hard to cost effectively have a cistern that is going to work for rainwater harvesting. And two, we're really trying to integrate water harvesting as part of the regional park system. So as an amenity for folks that live within Sterling Ranch. And so having it below ground, it doesn't lend itself to that amenity quality. And so we've really been working towards finding a way that we can blend all those different values and be cost effective.
Yeah. It's worth noting, we did a feasibility study, and the initial location we were looking at was a separate location that was kind of closer to Roxborough. And the problem with it was that the demand was essentially upgrading of where the supply would be collected. And my point is that and then just the overall footprint for which we would be able to harvest and actually get yield was too low. So we've done a lot of investigation to kind of understand the ratio that would make it a cost-effective solution, and that's why we're moving forward with Providence Village.
Questions?
Okay, 1 or 3. We'll see. So kind of jumping ahead off of Drew's question with the collection. So it's a pond type of a situation. I'm assuming you have a pump station set up at the pond, which then is used to, pressurize and distribute and apply. So a couple of questions. First, how much water can you store? How large is your basin? And then maybe second, on the pump station side, I'm wondering about water quality and filtration, and being rainwater, and we don't get a ton of rain this year, it may be being the exception, but generally we don't get a ton of rain. So how has that affected water quality when you don't have a lot of moving water? I'm sort of envisioning a stagnant situation. So what are your thoughts on that?
So the total storage that's designed is essentially equivalent to the water quality after volume. That's a stormwater term that is essentially used to regulate 80% of the storm. So we're not, first of all, we're not trying to capture every storm, because the size of the facility would be enormous to be able to accommodate that. So cost-wise, so we're using that as our design criteria for the storage volume. That allows us to regulate and to so that in combination with the demand in place on the system allows us to regulate the amount of water that is required to pump or that would stay in the pond. We call it the mud flat factor. We recognize that developments don't want a mud flat as an amenity, and so part of so optimizing that demand was an important aspect of that. And to the filtration part, there's 2 parts. There's the wetland, the active wetland polishing pieces before it flows into the pond, which, by the way, will be a depletion that we're going to need to replace. And then sand filters before it actually enters into the irrigation system. So it's a timing thing. And yes, I fully recognize that we will have some water quality challenges that will be addressed in the operations. But I think by working through the timing and emptying those ponds, we'll be able to meet those demands efficiently without it's okay that it runs dry. We expect that.
And I think kind of also highlighting that, so we're still working through this, but we recognize that it doesn't rain all the time. And so there is going to be an irrigation tap at these parks as well. But we're working with the development to determine an equitable connection fee for that irrigation tap with the recognition and the benefit of the rainwater harvesting, right? And so we do anticipate that there may be times where there have to run some water either to help keep the pond flowing or full, or water quality concerns, as well as potentially what type of landscaping they actually land on to put out there may need some augmentation for additional or supplemental water from the distribution system in general. And so we're working through all of those questions.
And on your pump station, I'm guessing that it's metered, so you can meter the water that you're removing, so you know how
Yeah,
much.
that's one part of this I didn't discuss. This will be monitored pretty heavily, and that was the advantage I was talking about. The whole facility where we have metered inflows, you know, at the diversion location, stage recorder within the actual facility, metered outflows, either metered outflows back to the stream as replacement or metered outflows to irrigation.
Can I come and see it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, right now it's just it's a drainage.
It's an existing facility, but the
Yeah, but
infrastructure.
we would love to give tours. We have the DNR folks and the ag and the joint ag and water committee coming out on October 30th to take a look, and yeah, I'd love to show people around.
Did you say there's part of your district is wastewater, right?
Yes.
Have you considered filling your pond with effluent as a supplemental source and then just pumping from the same pond?
So we do not have dual systems. So we don't have a potable and non-potable system. That was evaluated early on at Sterling Ranch and was determined to be cost prohibitive. And so right now we don't have the mechanisms to do that. I mean, we are in the process of collaborating with Douglas County and Castle Rock to build the regional wastewater treatment facility at Chatfield Basin, the old Roxborough plant. And there is some discussion of how we're going to use those, how we're going to capture those return flows. Currently, the plan is to capture them indirectly, I should say, indirect potable reuse, but to collect them just downstream of our discharge on the river, and then bring that water back into both Dominion and Castle Rock system to Sutton would be where it would go for Castle Rock. But there's also some discussions of how that could potentially benefit Ravenna with maybe a direct connection. So we're evaluating, there's lots of things on the table right now.
Thank you.
What's your current cost per acre foot for your water?
Which water?
What is how do you charge for a single family home?
Oh, geez. I wasn't prepared for that question. I'm going to have to get back to you. I don't want to I really don't want to misspeak on what the charge is. Like I said, there's separate charges for outdoor and indoor use. There's summer charges, there's winter charges, there's the budget. And so, but I can get you, if you give me your information, I can get you the sheet that we have pulled together for that.
I think we'd love to share that with the group if that's all right. I was going to ask the same question about the cost per single family and then the rate sheet.
I'm going to ask one question and then Catherine will go to you. Well, maybe it's a two-part question. One, just sort of going back to the very beginning and sort of the creation of your water system and that first slide you showed on the water that you have to prove for adequate water supply rules. We haven't really talked about the relationship between conservation within landscapes and the way in which it interfaces with water adequacy rules, but it is a really big back and forth. And so I think you did a really good job sort of highlighting that, because that's sort of was the impetus for where all of this has gone. You know, had there not been sort of these questions around water adequacy, Sterling Ranch may not have ended up as Sterling Ranch ended up, as we all kind of know that story. But the real question is, you know, I think in thinking about, you know, the purpose of the task force is to identify opportunities for accelerating transformation of how we manage outdoor water and landscapes. In hindsight, kind of looking back, and you're still trying to kind of prove this model in Colorado a decade later, you know, what are sort of the barriers to replicating this and how replicable is it? You you know, at a broader scale?
Yeah, no, I think those are all really good questions. I think, I mean, that gets posed quite frequently is that, well, it's kind of easy for you, right? Because it's new, it's a new development. And so you have blank slate, if you will, to implement these tools. You know, I think that there are ways that it can be implemented in existing residential areas or communities. I think one way that could be considered, obviously there would have to be some cost analysis completed on this, but you know, every time you pull building permits, you have to do something new, right? Codes change all the time. Like we pulled a permit to do a loft and now we have smoke alarms in every single one of our bedrooms, right? Instead of just outside the hallway. Like that could be something that utilities or municipalities could consider, is starting to adopt some of these changes, right? Like dual meters or different things. If you pull a permit, you have to change this part of your system. So I do think that that is something that can be considered in existing communities. I think at a minimum, the easy button would be to require new development to start installing these types of equipment and these tools and resources into their communities, right? Like to me, I mean, I've been at Dominion now a little over 2.5 years, and you know, quite honestly, and I've been in water for 25 years. This is super exciting. Like the stuff that is going on out there is innovative, it's cutting edge, and it's quite honestly where development should be in the West. And I think that in a time in Colorado, and not just Colorado, but I'll just speak to Colorado, where we are faced with you know, a struggle in the housing market, right? Affordability, shortage of homes, and then also the other factor of folks that just don't want people to be here. You know, like the not in my backyard people. You know, development's not evil. Development doesn't equal evil. There's a way to do it right. And I think that if we could leverage some of these lessons, it would stretch our water resources and use our water much more beneficially.
I think it's important also to just note that regarding sustainability, or rainwater is not part of the entitlement process. Just want to make sure that's clear to people. Like it's an average water supply and it's not included.
Online. So Greg asked, do you have estimates of how much rainwater you can harvest per square foot or acre in a typical year?
So means that we've been collecting data. We ran essentially a model that helps us to understand the claims that we're able to include in our water court process. And through that model, it's a rainfall runoff model / infiltration model that looks at the natural condition versus the developed condition. Kind of then provides us an understanding of the natural condition, and now we're able to actually keep that in combination with a storage balance, help in a demand that we placed on the system, gave us an average annual yield of approximately 50 acre feet for that Sterling Gulch facility. That 50 acre feet doesn't include the augmentation requirements. I think the augmentation requirements are roughly 10, 12 acre feet annually. So a net yield of around 30.
And that's just for that one area, right? It's not for the entire Sterling Ranch development.
What's the catchment area to produce 50?
I knew that was one statistic I meant to write down. I'm like, someone's gonna ask that, and I was driving over here. I can get back to you.
It's big.
No,
it's not so big.
They're not that substantial.
To the size of like, you know, little multifamily 100-house development, or are we talking like this?
No, it's the watershed area for the Sterling Gulch above that facility is fairly large.
It's pretty large, yeah.
And that was the point, is that to make it cost effective, you have to have that.
Yep.
Catherine,
Is it better if I go up there?
whatever is most comfortable for you.
Okay, I think I'm gonna get closer just so I can see better. I think my eyes are getting. Yeah.
Frank, I wanted the bigger TV. Why'd you get the small one?
I have some reading glasses if you'd like.
Wheel it closer. Hi, Frank.
So it is worth noting that this slide up here is in the PowerPoint, and indicates
We had some extra questions.
some principles here that I knew that people were gonna ask me, so feel free to look at them if you get a chance, but here's some highlighted kind of principles we have. It's really study. Sorry.
Thank you, and we'll get the slides out to everyone so you have all the information.
All right, okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about turf grass replacement opportunities and challenges today from the perspective of Colorado Springs Utilities and also the Native Grass Working Group. Next slide, please, Frank. Okay, so Colorado Springs, we have embraced native grasses as our primary turf grass replacement strategy. So that's kind of the framework from which we are running our programs. And we've chosen this strategy because native grasses have proven significant water savings benefits compared to turf grass, at least 50%, probably more like 80% and beyond. We still have yet to fully explore that. A lot lower cost to convert compared to other landscaping options, reduced maintenance once those grasses are established compared to turf grass, and it preserves living plants in urban landscapes, which is really important for all the environmental and human being benefits. And maybe even really importantly, they can be left unirrigated during periods of significant drought without dying. So in theory, if we go into a severe drought, we could leave the native grass areas unirrigated for a couple of years. And then when moisture returns and we're able to irrigate or we get precipitation, they can come back to life. So it gives us a lot of flexibility municipally to be able to weather severe droughts. Okay, so as I mentioned, we've gone all in on the native grass thing. And we, in 2023, we had a new residential program and expanded our 2 CII programs. I'm going to talk a little bit about those and then move on to some of the insights that we've gained for future work and investment moving forward from the Native Grass Working Group. Okay, so our residential program was not a rebate, and thank you CWCB for helping to fund this program. It was essentially an education/free materials program. So we required homeowner participants to attend 2 classes and then show us photos that they actually prepared a section of their yard for planting native grasses. And in return, we gave them high efficiency sprinkler nozzles to update their fixed spray heads, and then also free native grass seed. And at the end of 2023, right now, we have 91 homeowners who installed native grass seed over a total of 3.7 acres and swapped over 1,300 nozzles. So not everybody who did the nozzles did the seed, and not everybody who did the seed did the nozzles, but 91 of the homeowners did the seed, and probably an additional 30 did just nozzles. Okay, so how much did that cost us? It cost us about $51,000 total, including staff time, about half for materials, half for staff time, which when you average over the total 120 participants that either did nozzles or seed or both, that's about $425 per residential customer. And when we estimate our water savings, that kind of gets us in the ballpark for year 1 of $12,500 per acre foot of water saved, which is a little high for us, but it's kind of where we want to be. And we think if we streamline the program, we could probably get down to $9,500 per acre foot of water saved, which is definitely within the ballpark. It would be a competitive program in our suite of water conservation programs. So we're very encouraged by this, but we learned a couple of lessons. Next slide, please. The first one is that there was a ton of customer interest. We had 330 people sign up for the program just from 2 emails, and we have a waiting list of people who want it in 2024. So that was really encouraging, that we thought we'd have to sell this a lot more and drive participation, but really there was a lot of people wanting to do it on their own. The challenge is that we learned that these participants can be successful doing these projects themselves, but they need expert advice, recommendations, and social connection during the whole entire 2-year process. So there is an element of guiding people through this process if they're going to do it themselves. Yeah, and so I think with that, what we're hoping to do is do some more automated communications, get some program champions to help us with that, and try to drive people to group support sessions because we'd like to double participation. But this is really a bottleneck if we've got to provide hand-holding for 2 years. So we've got to figure out how to streamline that. But I'm really encouraged because I think this means it restores my faith that homeowners can do this and be successful. Okay, so let's go to the next one. All right, so our CII programs, we can do them through our programs either as direct installations or as a rebate. We pay 50 cents per square foot for a square foot of native grass installed. It does not have to be active turf grass for us. And my coworker, Lance Ackerman, along with Lisa Pace, they did 12 commercial projects this year, which totaled 8 converted acres. The total cost on that was about $120,000 in rebate dollars and about $25,000 for staff time. So our cost per acre foot saved initially on the commercial projects is about $16,500 per acre foot saved. So a bit higher than the residential, but still reasonable to be encouraging to move forward. Okay, so our key lessons on these programs is that customers, again, are interested. HOAs, institutions, churches, parks. We have a lot of interest from people, and we have another pipeline of program participants waiting in the wings there. But this is where the large acreage is available. So if you want to convert a lot of turf grass, probably CII is the place to do it. And the cost per acre foot for water safe for us is reasonable. All right. But turf replacement is not an equipment swap. It is a lot more complicated than that. So that needs to be considered. The one thing that we've really learned this year is that it requires a knowledgeable project manager to get that project from start to finish in a sustainable way that's going to be successful. This is an example of one of the projects at an HOA, and they got really good germination of the grass in part of it, not so great in the front. We have some crabgrass. This can definitely be recovered and brought to a successful finish, but it's going to require an active management plan. So that's where the project manager has to go out and say, okay, where are we? What do we need to do to correct this to get it to a great place? Now, we would hope that we'd have a lot of experienced project managers already, but we don't. Everybody is learning how to do these projects together successfully. All right, here's another one from the same HOA, good germination, a bit of weeds. Once again, this can be successful, but it's going to require active management. So where are we running into problems? The big challenge is that the landscape industry in Colorado is set up to grow and install and maintain sod, turf grass sod. And so native grasses, they're installed from seed, and I do not anticipate us ever having a large amount of native grass sod. They've tried it before, it wasn't feasible. So we're just gonna have to learn how to grow seed. So all of these factors can be challenges. And so we've got to learn how to do them well. And that's what we're learning about. Okay, so we did form the native grass working group. It actually was in 2021. I didn't realize it'd been that long. But what we did is we just started asking who wanted to learn about these projects and getting together informally. Our goal is to document the best practices of successful native grass projects. We've consulted with people, we've had working group sessions, we've gathered case studies, we've published our initial manual on how to do these projects successfully. It's available at coloradonativegrass.org. And we have a CWCB grant, or water plan grant, I should say, to translate that into a more active website that's more interactive that I'm really excited about. And that project is underway, should be available in 2024. So what are we learning from the Native Grass Working Group? We have over 100 stakeholders in that group all over the state of Colorado. People are trying projects. So I wanted to bring out 5 themes that we're starting to see from the work that's being done by a lot of partners, many of whom are in this room and participating in the group. So the best conversion areas, I mean, we can figure out what is non-functional turf, but not all non-functional turf is convertible. It has to be low use, sunny. It has to have few valuable mature shade trees. And it needs to be watered by separate irrigation zones from higher water use vegetation. So you can kind of look from aerial imagery to say how much non-functional turf do you have, but it's not until you start turning on the irrigation zones that you can actually confirm that that's convertible. So the area on the left in the photo is prime candidate for conversion. The area on the right is maybe convertible. It's got shade trees. If those are zoned together, then it becomes problematic. If they're separated, then we can do the side on the left pretty easily. Okay, so in HOAs, what we're seeing is that a lot of them were designed with these contiguous areas of turf grass that don't have these natural breaks by irrigation zone. So you can go out on site in an HOA and find a really great conversion site. Then you turn on the irrigation system and then realize that it's connected to this shady area with all these trees. So then you have to decide, are you going to pay the money to reconfigure the irrigation system, or are you just going to leave it as is? So this is where it just becomes challenging you can't redo every single irrigation system just to convert grass. So we have to look for the low-hanging fruit in these communities where there's all the criteria are met in order to do the conversions. Okay, the other challenge that we're seeing with HOAs is that the landscape industry, this is all new, it's new for everybody. And so the contractors are learning how to do this. Many of them are willing to try, but they're inexperienced with native grass projects. And then HOA board members typically don't have much expertise in native or in landscaping. So you kind of have these projects that are occurring and you don't have that person on site that's saying, wait, time out, we've reached a project pitfall before it gets kind of down the road. This is an example of one where we had an HOA do a conversion to blue grama. The contractor thought he had really great germination, and we went out on site and said, that's not the right grass, that's a weedy grass. So we need to back up and figure out how to get rid of that grass and get the grass we want. So we'll learn how to do that, but it's just an area of opportunity. Okay, so we did hold our first landscape contractor training in Colorado Springs in the spring. We had about 60 contractors show up, which was great. We don't have all the right answers, so we're just sharing what we know and just setting that stage for this learning to occur. But this will be a really key activity moving forward. In addition, we had a native grass workshop, which was 2 days in Colorado Springs at the end of July, and many of you came, so thank you for doing that. There we had expert presentations in the morning and visited project sites in the afternoon. We're just going to need a lot more of this activity to support these conversions going well. So one of the other themes that we're seeing is about vegetation removal and site preparation. So this is an area of a steep slope. When you're planting native grasses, you really need to remove or kill the existing vegetation before they're planted in existing construction. The mechanical removal is possible, but it's not ideal. It's challenging, it's expensive, it removes all the topsoil. So it's not the best way to do those projects. So the current method is to kill the existing grass and seed directly into it using 2 to 3 applications of glyphosate. And that retains all of the topsoil, gives the plants a really good seed bed to work with. So it's a good method. With the public perception of glyphosate, there are people out there that are seeking alternatives. There was a big project in Colorado Springs that used an alternative. They haven't proven to be as effective yet. We're seeing a lot of regrowth of the original turf grass in those areas. And if you look at the Cornell ratings of those alternatives, they're not quite as safe as glyphosate. So the glyphosate alternatives, we have more ideas about how to do this well, but those are not ready for prime time yet. This is a great opportunity for additional research. Okay, so which brings us to the point, should chemical use in these conversions be a major concern? And I can just share with you my perspective as a horticulturist. The first thing I wanted to say is just that this type of look in a native grass project is very common. We experience a lot of weeds. And so from a horticultural perspective, the chemicals can be a really valuable tool for these conversions to occur. And then in my opinion, if we can get through the conversion process, then we can get to what we all want, which is a lower water landscape with lower chemical use. But if we can use them as these tools in the conversion process, we can it actually enables us to do larger projects. So that's the benefit of using them. We have to recognize that chemicals, fertilizers, and herbicides are routinely used in turf grass maintenance. So most turf grass gets about 3 to 4 applications of fertilizer that may or may not be with herbicide use. So that's already occurring. We're using different products when we do these conversions, but all of them are regulated by the EPA and the Colorado Department of Ag. So my perspective is maybe it's worth investigating this to help us get through the conversion process to get to a longer term sustainable future. Okay, so the challenge that we have, this was another thing that came up, is this weed management. When you're growing grass from seed, you're going to get multiple flushes of weeds. And this is a very common look. This is one of our residential projects. She had buffalo grass and blue grama, and then had a huge flush of purslane, which was like the theme of 2023. We saw this so many different times. And there were homeowners who actually hand weeded that. And they did it all summer and they got through and they have beautiful projects now. So it absolutely is possible to hand weed. It's probably only realistic for small projects and projects that have a very large budget. So if we want to do large projects, I don't know that hand weeding is going to be a feasible option for lots and lots of large projects. And the other thing that we really found is that timely weed management is really important to keep those customers committed. Because if they get through the conversion process and they get here, and then this gets too messy, then they start thinking about going back to sod. So we've got to figure out a way to manage those weeds effectively. So this particular homeowner, she used, on the next slide, she used Quicksilver, which is carfentrazone. It took out all the purslane. It's a very, very safe herbicide, really has a low rating from Cornell in terms of risks to the environment, the applicator, to non-target organisms. I mean, you could see once that purslane is out of there, how the native grass is established within just a few weeks. So it's really promising, but we have a lot to learn about smart herbicide use in these projects. But we are seeking the safest options and can really rely on good research-based information to do that. And then one thing I do want to point out is that if we can get these projects through the establishment year and get to year 2 where we're only spot treating weeds, that has dramatically lower chemical use in the long run compared to unplanted gravel. Because unplanted gravel gets 2 or more applications of weed preventer or herbicide all the time to keep the weeds out. So if we really want to go to this lower chemical use, native grasses presents one of the best opportunities. Okay, but the last thing I wanted to talk about was achieving long-term irrigation reductions. This is where the water savings really occurs. We can convert grass all day long, but if we don't change the irrigation, it doesn't make any difference. So we've got to find a way to ensure that once these projects are done, that the irrigation schedule is changed permanently. And that is really the magic sauce. Because if a new contractor comes on site or someone changes their mind, they can just change the irrigation schedule instantaneously. It's very difficult to require and monitor permanent irrigation schedule changes through program rules. So we've probably got to do this through budgets or water use monitoring or something like that. So this has got to be a long-term investment to ensure that we actually get the water savings through these big projects. Okay, so the last few things I wanted to close with was number 1, if you're considering code or legislation or ordinances, I would highly recommend not regulating native grasses like non-functional turf grass, primarily because the water use is so dramatically different that they're really apples and oranges. So sometimes I see legislation come through that says it just talks about grass. And I think we need to be really clear about the difference between turf grass and native grasses, because we don't want to take the option for native grasses off the table. Likewise, I've heard a lot of folks say that they're going to eliminate spray irrigation as options for medians or other things like that. And I would again just say that we don't want to overregulate spray irrigation, because it's the way that we want to, it's a way that we can water native grasses to encourage them to be a solid ground cover versus, ornamental grasses. So those 2 things I would just say are worth more discussion and more talk about that. But personally, I think that this area is a huge opportunity for investment, support, research, education, capacity building. It's going to take us several years to get that capacity developed to be able to do this on a large scale, but I think it's one of the best sustainable landscaping options for Colorado. And that is all I have.
Questions?
Species do you normally have per mix? It sounded like two main ones. But yeah, is there opportunities for increased species just for diversity, especially as more acres are converted, and then also if y'all look at options for forbs?
Yeah, those are great questions. So we typically, in the programs that we have, in our residential, we allowed 4 options, which was buffalo grass, blue grama, mixing those two, and a native prairie mix, which had 7 different species in it. So we just find that a lot of people want to keep it short because they're used to that turf grass aesthetic. And so buffalo grass and blue grama are the best options for keeping it short. But in our commercial projects, we allow for any type of custom mix as long as 80% of those grasses are within the ecological site description major species in El Paso County. We want to have El Paso County grasses. So we'll allow any type of custom mix that meets those criteria. And then the forbs, you know, some people do that. It's really, I think, a wonderful thing for ecological function. It just makes the weed management more complicated. So if somebody has the capacity to do that, I think it's the better option for sure.
Yeah, we've started adding forbs, and yeah, it's more expensive up front. And you do get some of that die off in the establishment period, but we're seeing, well, you'll still get a significant increase on the back end, and it's kind of worth some of the like maybe 10% might lose on the front end. So I'm just curious if y'all were how y'all were might be managing that.
Yeah, you know, we've tried it. I've tried it personally, and I see like they decline over time unless you really manage the grasses. But Larry Vickerman at Chatfield Farms at Denver Botanic Gardens, he will go in and just lightly till an area just to kill off a few of the grass plants to keep the forbs active in there. So I think that's another area of like that could be really great for research as well. How to keep that long term.
We should chat because we're doing a lot of that.
Oh, that's great.
Like all of our seed mixes forbs now, and we have like huge flushes of like native and with forbs in all of our projects.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. See, we can just all learn from each other.
Can you chat a little bit more about the demographics you saw in your residential program, and then maybe some of the lessons you've learned about like time of day that you guys were hosting, when you hosted those, how long those classes were? Because I could imagine that depending on when those were hosted, maybe you lost some people, whether it was during the working day or after working day, things like that.
Yeah, we did them on Saturday mornings, and we did in person and virtual. So each class was kind of hybrid. And the demographics, we haven't really looked at that yet. We need to map where they were. But one thing that we did find is that we asked them what the current condition of their landscape was. And about 1/3 of them had well-watered turf grass. The other 1/3 had original landscaping that was still irrigated but in decline. And then the other 1/3 really had dirt and weeds. And for us, that declining landscape and dirt and weeds is actually a prime opportunity, because even though it's not necessarily turf grass conversion in the traditional sense, we're kind of preventing them, we hope, from going back into a more traditional type of. So, yeah, but I would say that one thing that was really interesting is we thought everybody would have an active irrigation system, but it turns out that about 30 of the participants didn't have or didn't want to use their irrigation system. So we gave them a hose and timer that was battery operated to get through the establishment period, and that they can use if they want to water later, but a lot of them were kind of just planning to water on demand. So I think in some ways that would be an area to enhance, to say, like, if you want to retire your irrigation system, you can use a timer instead. Yeah, but we're hoping that we're reaching more of our community rather than just, you know, well-off customers that can do this work anyway.
And you said you had a pretty extensive waiting list. How did you select people? Was it just first come, first serve, or sounds like you had a pretty even split of kind of people's situation? Was that taken into account, or not in the class? Did you figure that out?
Yeah, we just sent 2 emails. We have a monthly landscape newsletter for people that have reached out. You can just sign up on our website for that. So that was our first place. And then I can't remember. Oh, it went out in like our smart home newsletter. And people, and then we had 330 people who were like, okay, that's enough. We're gonna cut it all out. And then we set up the waiting list for 2024. Yeah, so there wasn't really any screening criteria except for that they had to be a residential active water customer.
Great. One more question and we'll move on.
Yeah, just, I was surprised when you showed the numbers per acre foot. I think the residential was less expensive than the larger scale commercial, and I would have thought that the larger scale would have been less expensive. Do you know why that is?
Yeah, would be, I think it's because with the commercial scale, we're paying 50 cents a square foot. So the pricing that we're seeing on those projects is really ranges from 20 cents a square foot to $1 a square foot, maybe a little bit more. And that's just for installation. It doesn't really include much project management, to be honest with you. So I think having that per square foot offer bumps up the contractor prices a little bit. Whereas, you know, on the homeowner side, we're just offering them free materials and advice. That's my sense. I think that we'll see pricing stabilize, but I do think that our rebate amount influences their pricing strategies. Just a thought.
Catherine, there's actually one more question online.
Like Austin had a question, but
that was me. I'm just curious, that was really interesting. I'm just curious if everything you were talking about applied to retrofits and turf replacement, or if you also looked at new developments and worked with any developers on putting in water efficient landscapes in the first place.
Yeah, this information is all for retrofits. My coworker Lisa Pace did get a grant to try to help new construction builders install more water efficient landscapes, but that's going to be launched in 2024. So we'll have to stay tuned on that one.
Cool, thanks.
And then Catherine, there's a question from Greg Fisher in here. I can read it out loud if you'd like. You said that native grass does not work as well under many mature trees. Is that because the trees don't get enough water? If we're trying to add it to the tree canopy and increase native grass, are those two in conflict?
Oh, okay. That's a great question. No, I don't think that they're in conflict because of the water use. They're in conflict because grasses are adapted to grow in sun and not in shade. And so this would be another area of opportunity for additional funding and research to look at what are those grasses that can tolerate shade. We have some ideas. I mean, really the fescues are the ones that you see, and there's some native fescues, but we don't feel like we have a full-on solution that we're willing to, like, you know, promote. We're still in the very just like, you should probably try this, you know. Cynthia, do you have?
Yeah, no, I mean, at least in parks and some of our larger projects, we are separating zones and doing two mixes. So a shade and a sun mix, and then having two separate hiker zones for the trees. And I do think it's important that we talk about trees in this discussion because, again, like, we have the same goals of we're trying to increase our tree canopy in Denver while reducing our water use. So strategically planting new trees to not prevent conversions, or just making sure when we're doing designs for new spaces that we're really thinking about how we're balancing all of that, and then balancing the water budget, and then just design is important on the front end.
Totally agree.
Yeah, irrigation sometimes becomes cost prohibitive in some of these projects. I mean, we'll see if you don't have to do irrigation, you know, we'll have a project be around maybe $1 a square foot, to if you do have to do irrigation to $5 a square foot. So it can really range. Totally change your budget.
Okay, thank you very much. Great.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, so we're going to make a transition online to, I hope I pronounce your name correctly. I apologize if I mess it up. Adite Baska.
Yeah, hi everyone. And good to hear the presentations, and I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person to visit, but yeah, I'm going to be talking about some previous work and also some future work. So I have some people listed on here that are connected with that future work and previous work, and also looking for new connections. I think there's a lot of, you know, just that last presentation, some areas we might connect around that. But yeah, so I'm going to be talking about the minimizing of negative effects on urban heat and water quality from landscape transformation. So the next slide is, you know, just looking at some of our turf grass replacement programs, one particular type, which is a rebate, and, collecting where those are in 2022. So, based on all the efforts that are going on with CWCB and in Colorado, we're expecting a lot more, and ongoing changes in Colorado to increase the landscape transformations. So in the next slide, I'm going to be looking at some previous work. So this is one previous study in Las Vegas in their Cash for Grass program. And so they found, good water use reductions, about 20% for homes that participated. And then they also were looking at energy use and in those homes compared to other homes that didn't convert in terms of participate in the Cash for Grass program. And so they saw that there was a minimal increase in energy use. And they're, looking at the thought if our outdoor environment is hotter, if people are using more AC. And so they found that to be kind of minimally increased. The next slide is about another study, which was in Sacramento, and they found, they were looking at these drought tolerant yards versus conventional yards. And so they found these air temperatures that were 0.5 degrees warmer in the drought tolerant, but they also found larger differences where those drought tolerant yards were hardscape and gravel. And also that the effect of tree cover was larger than the difference between that ground cover from turf grass to drought tolerant. So just highlighting not all landscape transformations are the same. And that hardscape and gravel is kind of one extreme end in terms of heating versus the effect of tree cover on cooling. And so it's interesting to hear that discussion about the native grasses and, maybe think about where that might be in the spectrum here. And there has been some previous work in Denver, not looking at landscape transformation specifically, but looking at urban land cover and also highlighting the importance of tree canopy. And so this is something that we are developing a proposal around to look at a little bit more as communities are implementing more landscape transformation. So in the next slide, this is, just that previous one. So there's, concerns about equity. So, of course, the climate change impacts in general, kind of making urban heat and the health effects and the well-being effects exacerbated. And there's also that, potential for that also to exacerbate the inequities and where urban heat and where that landscaping, green space and tree canopy is. So thinking about where we might target different types of landscaping transformations and where it might not be the best idea to target because of existing urban heat concerns and more target tree canopy. So this is this next slide is part of this proposed work, which is focusing on a water plan grant with some of the partners I listed on that first slide. So including Denver Water, primarily looking at the garden in a box and other landscape transformations that have happened or are going to happen, and using two different methods to look at what effect those have on urban heat. So a remotely sensed method using Landsat satellite data to map out temperature changes before and after these landscape transformations, and then also on the ground measurements using low-cost sensors in places where these landscape transformations have occurred. So for example, institutional changes that have occurred, like on Denver Water campus, and also soliciting other ideas on good places where these measurements might be able to take place. And the next part is thinking about another section about another potential consequence of landscape transformations, which we actually heard some about just in that last presentation from Colorado Springs. And here thinking about water quality. So this is a slide from Jane Clary, who, you know, we're thinking about these increasing requirements in the stormwater MS4 permits for, you know, more clear, specific, and measurable requirements. So kind of ramping up what's needed for those MS4 permits. And then also there's more TMDL driven requirements for nutrients. So that's getting more stringent. There's also these basin control regulations. So the Barberton TMDL, the Bear Creek Lake TMDL is in progress. And then elsewhere in the kind of metro area, looking at these basin control regulations, which are putting pressure on nutrients in stormwater. And so one of the questions that, you know, we're interested in is, what do these landscape transformations do to the nutrient contributions to these water bodies? So in the next slide, Jane had sent along this information on total phosphorus, which is one of the key factors for these you know, new requirements which are coming online. So this is looking at the total phosphorus contributions by land use, and looking at commercial, highway, industrial, open space, and residential. And so we're seeing that residential has the highest within the urban land uses, has the highest contribution of total phosphorus. And so and then you're also seeing the wastewater treatment limit for existing facilities, and then, you know, going down to that warm water interim value. So really need to, you know, kind of ratchet down the total phosphorus coming off of these land uses, and in particular residential land uses. And the next slide is just highlighting for the Cherry Creek Basin in particular the total phosphorus and total nitrogen pie chart of where these nutrients are coming from. And so we see contributions from, on the left for the total phosphorus, there's bed bank contributions, atmospheric deposition, point sources are pretty small, septic systems, grass shrub, but really the biggest chunk for both of them is developed land. And so that's, and we just saw on that previous slide, you know, a good chunk from that residential developed land, you know, contributing phosphorus, as well as nitrogen. It's even more from the developed land. So the point sources are being, you know, becoming more stringent with, you know, wastewater treatment regulations, but you know, really the largest chunk is thinking about how do we better manage these non-point contributions from our developed lands, particularly our residential areas, and a big chunk of that is from fertilizer, from turf grass. So in the next slide, yeah, this is an important part of the overall nutrient load to these receiving water bodies. And so we want to understand how landscape transformations will affect that. It's not, you know, completely straightforward to predict how landscape transformations will affect the water quality and specifically nutrients, because we're expecting both changes in how much fertilizer is being applied. So we, you know, are going to be expecting, you know, less application over time, and we're expecting changes in how much flow there is, return flow there is to streams as people are changing irrigation to these landscapes which are transformed. So those both are expected to change simultaneously, which is something we're interested in trying to see what the net effect of that is. So in that next slide, this is some previous work looking at the changes in flow, or not necessarily changes, but more about kind of current conditions. So this is a study that with, you know, throughout the metro area, we're looking at some streams that have stream gauges through the Mile High Flood District and US Geological Survey. And using the fact that, you know, this whole region is getting tap water from higher elevation source areas, which is, you know, and that tap water is isotopically distinct. So we're using hydrogen and oxygen isotopes as tracers of tap water into the stream base flow in this region. And so this is looking at sampling in 2019, 2020 was a gap year, and then, you know, again in 2021 and 2022. And using that isotopic distinction between the tap water that's coming from, you know, imported from outside the watershed compared to the local precipitation that's recharging groundwater, to separate how much water during base flow, so during dry weather conditions, how much is coming from originating from tap water versus, you know, locally derived water. And so we're seeing that that's those tap water box plots, and we're seeing for all of these watersheds, all the different sampling dates, the streams are, you know, mostly during base flow, these urban streams are mostly made up of tap water. And then we also were separating the leaking pipe part of that tap water with just some really general information about from the Colorado Water Loss Initiative to get at the lawn irrigation return flow part. And so basically that's hovering around 50% of our base flow, you know, with you know, as you can see, some good variability there around there. But all this is going to say that we are you know, having our lawn irrigation return flows contributing base flow to our urban streams. Dry weather flows do make up part of our, you know, nutrient contributions to our receiving water bodies. So as our base flow is changing, and we're expecting that to reduce as, you know, our landscapes are transformed and irrigated more efficiently for the, you know, lower water use plants, we're expecting a reduction in the amount of base flow. And so in the next slide, this is another, you know, proposed work topic of using Sterling Ranch, which we heard about earlier. So that was a great background to say that, you know, the Sterling Ranch is you know, and kind of low water use landscape that has been built out and is continuing to be built out, where we're not seeing that patchwork of landscape conversions. We're actually seeing the entire neighborhood and development being installed with these, you know, low water use landscapes. So we're interested in monitoring the water quality in runoff and in base flow in Sterling Ranch to get at how the nutrient contributions are different in that landscape compared to another developing watershed. So we're thinking about Westro Gulch, since we're already doing work there, that has more conventional turf grass type of development. So to be able to compare the two. And we heard some earlier also about some other water quality components with herbicide use, and, you know, the transition in existing landscapes with retrofits. This, I think that's also of interest to us, and we're, you know, not right now we're, you know, thinking about these two new developments as more, you know, they have more of a consistent type of landscaping to allow us to hopefully detect the effect on a watershed scale to look at the differences in water quality. And that's all I have for you today. So yeah, happy to take any questions if we have time for that.
One question from Drew and then another one from Safari.
So I'm curious about using Landsat at a 30-meter resolution, that's like 100-foot square. Most of those gardens in a box are 200 square feet. So how is Landsat gonna pick up a front yard of a single family home?
Yeah, so that's why we were trying to get at two different scales. So we're looking both at the remote sensing and the on the ground measurements. And so we're thinking about asking for soliciting volunteers who are willing to have those eye buttons, those low cost sensors installed to get at a much finer scale. If we can get volunteers for that. But then, yeah, Landsat would be more looking at the satellite scale, would be more looking at larger scale changes. So it might not be able to pick up, the effect of small installations, but if we have large enough installations that change the temperature enough that we can detect it on Landsat, we'd also like to see that, and how much we can see that difference.
I was also curious if you were going to do any soil analysis, because that could play a role in runoff and nutrients as well, especially if they're doing soil amendments and what kind they're using. So just curious if you're considering that as well.
Yeah, I also forgot to mention another way that, so I was saying the fertilizer application and the irrigation can change. Another part that can change is the runoff coefficients and the amount of runoff from landscapes that have been converted. So Andrew Earls at Right Water Engineers has been doing some work on trying to look at different types of hardscapes and how much runoff is being generated from them versus turf grass versus other types of alternatives, turf grass alternatives. So there are some types of landscape conversions which would potentially lead to more less infiltration. And so that's part of, we're not necessarily looking right now at the plot scale, but that would be part of it, to look at that conversion cumulatively at the watershed scale. What does that do to water quality?
Go ahead. Are you going to provide recommendations for the equity analysis that you showed for Denver? Because I'm actually doing some of that right now as well. And, 70% of the turf in Denver is actually privately owned. And so I would just be curious as to kind of your recommendations on that.
Yes. So one of the things we were thinking about was looking at what factors most affect the changes in urban heat, and then relating that to that equity analysis. And so I'd like to be able to connect with you more to provide some recommendations on the types of transformations that might be applicable in different areas that already have different amounts of green space and tree cover and existing urban heat concerns.
Like Austin has his hand raised.
Austin?
Yeah, that was really interesting. I was wondering if you've been able, or if it's possible to model how much of that water that is returning to base flow might have, or I guess what's the role of trees in all of this? I'm wondering, because trees are clearly getting free irrigation from lawn irrigation that's not necessarily intended for the trees. Is it possible to model how much more would be returning to base flow if there weren't the trees roots intercepting the water and then evapotranspirating it? And which then leads to the question of how much of our urban trees water budget is actually attributable to this irrigation that you're researching, and that eventually does go to base flow if it's not intercepted.
Yeah, I'd like to talk with you more about that, Austin, because I think if we have some more information on the tree water use, it may be it may be possible to do that, but yeah, we don't, right, I guess right now we wouldn't be able to, but maybe with some more information on individual tree water use data.
Other questions? All right, well, let's move to our final presentation in this session, then we'll take a break. It seems like most people have gotten up through this, but we'll take a break for everyone else. So Aaliyah Santestevan from Department of Water Resources.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. I apologize, I'm not in person. Can you hear me okay? Perfect. I'm going to share my screen. It says the host has disabled screen sharing.
Hang on, we'll get you screen sharing. 1 second.
Thank you. So just a little bit about me real quick. I work for the Division of Water Resources in Water Division 1. I'm an assistant division engineer. I am in charge of the South Platte River water administration and operations from the headwaters, which is up in South Park, down through Waterton Canyon, Chatfield Reservoir, along the Front Range, east of Greeley is where I stop. So I'm in charge of water commissioners, the diversions from the river, water coming back to the river, all the water court operations in that area. So it's a pretty large area. And I'm going to be talking today about return flows and kind of giving a brief overview of return flows, and then talking a little bit about, the effect of the urban environment, why they're important in the urban environment, and then what happens if turf is removed. Okay. So I want to start with just a quick overview of return flows, and I'm going to take you guys way back to the 1800s and the 1860s on the South Platte, when the people were exploring this area and they were walking down the river. There was a lot of reports in the 1860s talking about below the mouth of the Poudre River at the confluence with the South Platte and the Poudre, that the South Platte was dry, entirely dry from that location all the way to the state line. So this was not the perennial river that we're used to today. It was more of an intermittent type river. And some of this can be found in these old publications. This one was by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Water Rights and Interstate Streams, and there's quite a few accounts. And there was some measurements and some reporting about return seepage, how return seepage at times was coming back to the river and causing it to become live again. As water started to become appropriated and water rights were becoming developed, what we typically saw was that the senior water rights were those water rights that were early in the 1860s, and they were located up towards the more mountainous areas. You can see them in this slide in the green, up in the foothills areas near Fort Collins, Boulder. We see some of our more senior rights. And then as most of those were used for mining, irrigation use. And as the water return flow started to come back to the river, we start to see this progression of water rights going downstream towards the east, towards the state line, where the blue line is that late 1860s to early 1870s. We start to see the 1880 water rights shown in the Morgan County, Weld County area with the red line, and then out towards the state line. Those are typically 1880 water rights to 1890s. And we believe this is largely caused by return flows from irrigation that was diverted and coming back to the stream, keeping that stream alive. Today, this is the reality of the river. We do see return flows coming back to the stream very frequently. This is a snapshot of water administration in 2008. And what I would just like to highlight is that the graph in the photo shows the river flows, and you can see how they were high, they come down. We can see they almost go to zero the first time where the Jackson Lake Inlet is at, where it diverts. So the Jackson Lake is taking almost entirely what's in the river, And then we start to see that the flows climb again. And that climbing is due largely to return flows. And again, at the North Sterling Canal, we see the North Sterling is taking the entire river, and then we see our river come back. This is what happens with water administration on a daily basis. And quite frequently, we can dry the river, the South Platte River, in numerous spots on a single day. So what are lawn irrigation return flows? What we're talking about is in lawn irrigation return flows is from the urban environment, the grass areas, the lawns, either through residential areas or through commercial areas. And it's not agricultural irrigation, but the lawn irrigation itself. And it's that amount of water that percolates below the root zone that's not available for plant uptake that begins to make its way back to the river. And there was a study done in the mid-1980s, and it was for Cottonwood Water and Sanitation District. And they used these small bucket lysimeters that were installed in people's lawns on turf grass specifically. And what the goal of the study was to do was to show how much water was applied and try to relate it to the amount of deep percolation that occurred from irrigating and watering lawns. This study was also replicated in the mid-1990s at CSU. And the way they're used today is they're really municipalities, entities are using this type of analysis to figure out how much of their water is returning back to the river on any given day. And the way the calculations work, just quickly in an overview, is that we look at the base winter water use, which is typically December to February, and all of that water consumed in that period is typically considered indoor use. And then what happens when we go into the summertime months, spring, summer, fall months, is that any water applied in excess of that base use is typically assumed to be outdoor irrigation use. And the way it's determined is that you look at aerial imagery, they delineate the grass areas. They do deduct the tree canopies out of this calculation. I think Austin in the previous presentation had a comment about trees. When we're looking at LERFs, that is deducted out of the equation. And so what we're left with is that the open exposed grass turf areas is what's being used in these types of analyses. The next step is to figure out how much water was applied and then to relate it to the amount of deep percolation. And that's done through what we call the Cottonwood curve. And that's typically what's been accepted in the water courts. And that type of analysis is what is generally used in every application where they seek a decree acknowledging and adjudicating lawn irrigation return flows. Typically, that amount is about 15% of the amount of water applied is what gets tagged as a lawn irrigation return flow. So once we know the amount of water that has percolated below the root zone, the next step that entities will do is figure out the timing of when those return flows will impact the stream. And that's typically done through what's called a Glover methodology. It was a analysis that looks at the aquifer characteristics and distances to the stream and figures out the timing of those flows back to the stream system. In most decrees, lawn irrigation return flows have a provision where they must be requantified every 5 years. And the reason is because neighborhoods change, developments change. A lot of the early decrees, they were forecasting to a full build situation. And so as they were growing and as the neighborhoods were building, they wanted to come back and requantify some of this. And I think it's just also a good check. People realize that it's a good check to keep double checking to see what your lawn irrigation return flows are doing depending on different scenarios. In more recent years, we have seen provisions in decrees where it accounts for drought years or years where entities have had water restrictions. How does that impact the lawn irrigation return flows that are coming back to the stream. So why are these lawn irrigation return flows important in the urban environment? You know, I think we saw, you know, a really great presentation before this about the water quality effects that are associated with it. But I think what I want to talk about is really how are those lawn irrigation return flows used? And many municipalities or entities will reuse these lawn irrigation return flows once they've quantified them and once they know where they're impacting the stream system at and the timing of that. They can really be used as a valuable part of a municipality's water portfolio. An example would be a municipality that pumps water from wells. Typically, they have to augment these wells because the wells pump out of priority. And if they can reduce the amount of water that was consumptively used by taking a credit for lawn irrigation return flows that return to the stream, they have to augment less, which means less money, less effort. So these lawn irrigation return flows can really be used to offset their pumping obligation to provide the potable water. The other thing we see is that a lot of entities or municipalities, some, you know, typically ones that have senior water rights that they use, maybe they don't use a pump, but they divert water from the stream, treat it. They can use these lawn irrigation return flows in a successive fashion. They can deliver potable water to their customers. And then again, these LURFs are reused. They can lease that LURF water back. They can use it to offset their obligations, but we do see them leasing to other entities quite a bit as well. So they have quite a bit of value. Just an example, Denver Water, the big dog out there in the municipality business, they have a LURF decree that was decreed in an 04 case. And they did an extensive analysis to show that they had lawn irrigation return flows that were accruing to all of the smaller tributaries within the Denver metro area, within its service area. And on a daily basis, they calculate the amount of water that they're distributing to their customers. They can identify what colors of water they have, whether that water is reusable, whether it's single-use water. They know the blend of water. And then what they do is they calculate how much of that water is coming back as a return flow. And they use it to lease out to smaller plans as a replacement supply. So it's really, really, I think, a big tool for a lot of these municipalities. In this graphic, I just wanted to show kind of a visual. This is from the USGS, and it just kind of shows that connection between pumps, wells, pulling water out of the aquifer and recharge areas, and the lawns are considered like a recharge area that are contributing back to that stream system. This next slide is a copy of one of the early publications, the Cottonwood Curve. And in this graph, you can see it really shows water applied on the horizontal axis, and on the vertical axis is deep percolation. So as more water is applied, there's more deep percolation occurring. It's a fairly simple concept. And this is the Cottonwood Curve that's typically referred to. This last photo is just showing the interface of how things may work, how we have the municipalities' ag use, all of the interactions that are going on. And I think it's easy to understand that these lawn irrigation return flows can be really beneficial to a municipality's portfolio. So the last thing I just want to mention is what happens if turf is removed from the urban landscape. And I think, as it was previously mentioned, we're going to see less lawn irrigation return flows. And I think whether that's through different types of grasses grown, whether it's native grasses versus turf grasses that require less water. I think in our analyses, in these updates of lawn irrigation return flows, we'll start to see less water was applied, so therefore there are less lawn irrigation return flows available for municipalities to lease or to use to offset their own obligations. I think this can result in less revenues from leasing that water, but I think the flip side to that is also that there's less first use of that water too. So there's a huge water savings of that first use that's going out to being applied to the lawns. That could offset some of the loss in the LERFs. In those instances where entities or municipalities are using lawn irrigation return flows to replace, use as a replacement source for some of their pumping or some of their obligations, obviously they will have less opportunity to do that through LERFs and may have to look for other sources or tap into their portfolio of other types of water in order to do some of that. The other thing is that I wanted to point out is that a lot of these older LERF decrees were decreed in the 1980s, which is 40 years ago. And the knowledge and understanding and the intricacies back then aren't what they are today. So I think we could see some discrepancies with these older decrees. There could be some instances where, you know, the decree maybe allows for more than what's really occurring or what our understanding is today of what's going on. So those are some of the implications of what might happen if turf is removed from urban landscapes. So I'd kind of breeze through that real quick because I know we're short on time. Can I answer any questions?
Questions in the room or online? Drew?
I'm gonna be provocative. I think LERFs are total bullshit. Personally, I get the concept of agricultural return flows, 100%. We are flood irrigating. Some of that water is gonna go past the root zone. We know from the research that Resource Central does and others that 75% of a residential community is under irrigating their landscape. There is no possible way that 15% of applied water is making it back to the stream. So I mean, it's a total house of cards. Emperor has no clothes. In my personal opinion, City of Westminster has LERFs. We rely on them in our water rights portfolio and we trade against them exactly like the city engineer was saying, but I just don't believe any of it.
Yeah, I think that's a very common opinion. And you know, I think what's important is these got decreed. So whether it's whether you believe it or not, the decree says you can do it, and that's just the reality of the world we live in. But I think you bring a good point. The study had some limitations. I think anybody who's looked at that Cottonwood report can you know point some of those out. But you're not the only one with that opinion.
Anyone want to follow up that one from Drew?
Many of the cities where we're doing our water efficiency services have brought to the task, the requirement they have to continue with the augmentations. So as we're investing in landscape transformations, when they do their 5-year reevaluation, you know, they have to make sure that their obligation is met. So we are upfront about that situation with regard to the trade-offs that involves.
Right. It's a good point.
I would add, not to be controversial, but maybe just this is more of an observation. You know, in the world of landscaping, and this is just sort of an interesting overlap that a lot of people don't consider. But in the world of landscaping and efficient water use and how, you know, communities like ours where we have a water waste ordinance and those types of things, you know, we're always preaching, how can we be more efficient? You know, how can we water to the needs of the plant? And we're, you know, there's always these ongoing discussions of what is the appropriate amount of water. And if you're watering beyond the root zone, whether it's in urban landscaping or whether it's in agriculture, you're watering beyond the root zone. Some might consider that to be water waste. And I think theoretically, we're trying to reduce that waste without really fully taking into consideration the other side of what's happening on the return flows. So Not saying it's good or bad. I think that's just the reality that we're promoting that, whether it's through turf removal or whether it's through more effective or more efficient irrigation of the existing turf. We're still promoting it either way. And those turfs are going to go down.
Yeah, you bring up some great points, and I think, some people can think of this as waste, and others would look at the flip side and say, well, if in the calculations, there's like a 5% spray loss and surface type loss thing. So, 15% plus that 5%, somebody would say, well, that's 80% efficient. We're actually doing pretty good. That lawn irrigation is actually fairly efficient. But you bring up a really good point.
Well, I would say, just to kind of close that thought on waste, looking at it on a retail level, our customers, if we follow the path of the water, our customers are paying for the water that goes through the meter. And if they're paying for the water that goes through the meter, are they receiving a benefit from that? And I would say that if it's percolating past the root zone, then they're not. So I've used this example before, when it comes to a business model, and it's sort of a tongue-in-cheek business model, but we'll sell you the water and then you use it, and then it percolates past the root zone. We're going to recapture it in the form of a LURF, and we're going to sell it back to you again. So it's pretty good recycle. Not sure the customer really likes that in concept, but it's kind of what we're doing.
Well, that is, I think, a partnership to our work is trying to determine exactly how much water is right to apply, and then helping people to do so in not seeking to under irrigate like Drew recognizes or over irrigate. We're trying to get people to irrigate just the right amount if we can through a variety of measures.
I think that's the challenge.
It definitely is. Yeah, there's so many imperfections in the system.
I wouldn't say imperfections. I would say opportunities.
Question, and this is more of just a strange curiosity, but we've been kind of irrigating urban landscapes maybe for maybe 70 years, somewhere in there, maybe more in older parts of municipalities. But is there this slug of water that's kind of essentially just, I would assume it just depends on the ground or the hydrology and the geology, but is that going to show up somewhere someday? I mean, I know that some of it goes back to the stream, but what's the rest of it doing?
No, I think it's a great question. And I will tell you, similar to how I opened up with this concept of the South Platte being dry, and now it's like a perennial river. I've witnessed on some of the tributaries to Plum Creek and Cherry Creek, some of those tributaries stay in running water more frequently and year long. Cherry Creek itself used to go dry every year when I started in this business of administration. And in the last 5 years, we've rarely had occasions where Cherry Creek is going dry. So I think it's happening. And I think that's what you're talking about, is that there are slugs of water from new developments, from lawn irrigation return flows that are keeping those ephemeral or perennial type gullies, stream systems flowing now. So I think it's visible with the work that I've been doing, but I think it's occurring.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all.
Okay. So timing wise, to sort of look at the schedule here for a moment. That took a long time this morning. We have a presentation from Doug, an update from Jenna, but I think it'd be good if we take like a 10-minute break. Take a moment. I need a bio break. Reconvene in here, and then we'll pick up with Doug's presentation and do Jenna before lunch. We might end up taking a few minutes out of lunch, but I think we'll be fine. And then that'll take us into more interactive part of the afternoon. So does that work for everybody? Quick break. Which is
very similar. It's sold as like that. Loved it.
Yeah.
That one. So what, I went out there about.
On budgets that you don't because that's the one that my folks have said to do.
I think that's.
Because of,
Oh, okay, yeah.
yeah, or Parks and Open,
Badly.
integrated pest management person.
Not saying they don't care, because I think they do care.
Right. I feel like Doug doesn't really need an introduction to any of you. I think most of you know him. And are familiar with this ongoing report, but I'm sure he will provide that context and kick off the ongoing analysis of turf replacement economics.
For a while. So I'm going to assume that most of you can't read anything that's on the screen pretty much. So I can read portions of this to you, because I wouldn't be able to. So anyway, BBC is continuing to work with CWCB and for CWCB in trying to better understand the economics of turf replacement and other similar to that. There we go. Okay, so very simply put, this year is to take advantage of the growing body of information, much of which is in the or on the phone or on the computer today. But I think we're all learning more and more about turf replacement. And with that, this growing body of experience, I think we can continue to improve on some very preliminary numbers that we provided last year. Kind of switch to a timeline here. So last year we put together what we call the exploratory analysis of the cost benefits and potential water savings from turf replacement. That was presented at the Landscape Summit, which was in Auraria on November 9th. And then that kind of fed into a final report, which I say final, it was final for the time. But that was put together and published on January 4th. So this year we're targeting an updated report around the time of the Colorado Water Congress, in January. And we still don't think that's going to be the ultimate answer on turf replacement by any means. And so we think there probably will be ongoing refinements in 2024 as well. So this is okay. So components of that 2022 study, there were initial estimates of kind of the range of potential turf acres in Colorado, not a number that really anyone had a good handle on at that point in time. Some initial estimates of the potential water savings from turf replacement, and some corresponding estimates of the potential costs and benefits from the standpoint of the homeowner, the standpoint of the utility, and so forth. Feedback from that study, which is feeding very much into this one, is first of all that the estimated turf acres seem too low. So we estimated we estimated that there was the basic let's skip over to this for a second here. Actually, I've got another slide that covers that better. But anyway, we think that that's probably true, that the turf acres probably were too low. Cost estimates may be too high. I think that's true in part. I think it's even more complicated than we sort of highlighted last year. And finally, that the tone is important in this report. And I think some readers felt that that first report seemed too negative or too critical of turf replacement, and that wasn't our intention. But we recognize that we need to work on that. So some part of what we're doing this time around is incorporating new sources of information. We have a fair amount of time. Yeah,
It goes quick. There'll be two more, I think.
okay, good. We have a fair amount of data available. Turf replacement program funding applications. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Austin's work with Dr. Cog on the Dr. Cog planimetric analysis gives us some further insight into how many turf acres there may actually be. I very much enjoyed the native grass workshops in Colorado Springs that Catherine organized, and I learned a lot from those as well. And then we've been conducting interviews with kind of a wide variety of folks in utility conservation departments, practitioners, landscapers, and others. And that's an ongoing process as well. Yes. Talking about the turf replacement funding information. So there are more than 25 applications so far, but the information provided in those applications and in some follow-up work that Jenna has been doing with the applicants, we're able to identify projected square footage and projected estimated water savings for 25 of the turf replacement applications so far. The median water savings estimate's about 12.5 gallons per square foot, which is actually pretty consistent with what we thought in the initial report. The median rebate cost alone is about $1.62 per square foot. And those 25 applications encompass about 1.5 million square feet of turf replacement, with a projected annual savings of about 19 million gallons per year, which is about 60 acre feet per year, and then at a total incentive cost of about $1.7 million. So that works out to about $45,000 per acre foot saved just in terms of the incentive cost. On the question of the number of turf acres, so in the 2022 report, we developed a range of estimates based on the outdoor water use estimates in the water plan, and then some assumptions about irrigation efficiency, deficit irrigation, and things like that. So from that, we had sort of a central estimate of about 104,000 turf acres statewide, plus or minus 50%, so a range of 50 to 150,000 acre feet, or 150,000 acre feet. Austin's work with Dr. Cog indicated that there's about 114,000 acres, irrigated acres, not necessarily all in turf, but just within the Dr. Cog territory alone. So that's about 34 irrigated acres per 1,000 residents. And if you extrapolate that to the entire Front Range, that gives you an estimate of about almost 170,000 acres of turf, and potentially even more statewide. So trying to reconcile those to that estimate to the outdoor water use numbers in the water plan, really the only way to reconcile this is to believe that water use efficiency is higher than what we assumed in the last version of the report, 2022, or there's a greater extent of deficit irrigation. So that's consistent with some of what Drew was mentioning just a few minutes ago. Go on to the next slide. Now the cost piece, this is even more complex, but I think the more we learn, the more nuanced I think turf replacement is. And so I think a way that may be more useful to look at the cost this year is in terms of sort of a decision tree, and maybe from the standpoint of the property owner or the homeowner. And so what we're thinking is that basically we start from the initial decision of what do they want to replace the turf with? Is it going to be native grass? Is it going to be lower use plants? Could be some combination of both. And then there's a sort of a sequence of decisions along the way, all of which ultimately affect what the cost estimates will turn out to be. So, one of the big questions is, are you cutting out the old turf and hauling it away, or are you killing it and leaving it in place? If you're killing it and leaving it in place, how are you doing that? So forth. As we work through some of this stuff, we're thinking that the cost estimates could range from less than $1 per square foot to probably as much as $5 per square foot, depending on what choices are made along this process. Go to the next slide. Let's see. Then I think the other thing we want to do better on this round of the report, or at least in more depth, is dig into what the potential maintenance cost estimate or potential maintenance cost savings might be. I think obviously reduced water use is the big one, but avoiding mowing or greatly reducing mowing and trimming, probably less fertilizing. To some extent, some of that's going to be offset by the additional weeding time required, especially in the first year. So some of the folks we've been talking to, this is sort of an echo chamber with this group, but Catherine, Julia in Colorado Springs Utilities, Steve Lawyers, a longtime native grass landscaping specialist down in Colorado Springs. Austin, we talked to Tim York from Aurora Water, sincerely. We've got an upcoming interview, I think, with Resource Central, and we'll continue to talk with more folks, just trying to benefit again as much as we can from the experience that folks are finding, what they're learning from their work here. So, to some extent, one of the reasons I want to come talk to you guys today is to again make sure that we're turning over the rocks we need to be turning over in this research. So if there are other folks you really think we should talk to, other studies that you know of that are really useful, I certainly appreciate hearing about it, and I know as well. That's it for our update.
Should interview our team.
Yeah, definitely. Questions or comments or thoughts at this point?
I just want to say thanks, and I'm really looking forward to seeing this. I think having all, because we're working on a project that is CWCB funded, looking at large scale turf replacement, and the cost part, yeah, as you note, is super challenging and tricky. And so I think I like the way you put it down, and I think it's going to be hard to pull those numbers together, but Frank, Northern, others have great data, and I think that's going to be really useful.
Yeah, I think so too, and I'm glad to hear that. I'm excited about it, and I think it sort of better reflects, it's less of an oversimplification than the way we might have approached it last year.
I might suggest you consider interviewing everybody on the task force.
To do that, definitely do that. Yeah.
At least intend to do so.
Yeah, for sure. That sounds good.
Yep. Maybe more of a comment. I think the cost side is particularly interesting. You were talking about the residential cost being cheaper than the commercial cost, but were you valuing the homeowner's time?
No.
Right. And so the commercial cost, you're paying someone to do that work. So that's not really apples to apples in your numbers. And I don't know, you're sort of getting at it here because you're not really counting their personal time to take out the grass, but maybe you're also offsetting it with they're mowing it less, or they're weeding less, or they're doing less. So it's like we got to figure out a way to equate the labor side of the homeowner.
Yeah, our thought is that we do want to value that time, and we'll probably use something simple. I think the average hourly wage is in the front range is around $25
an hour. Yep.
Like that for another piece that we struggle with too is the whole economies of scale aspect of this, in terms of how much we've really focused mostly from a sort of a homeowner perspective, thinking about relatively small replacement projects. But and I know Colorado Springs has given us some data on their estimates of kind of how costs change with as you get into larger and larger projects. But any information on that would be particularly valuable, I think.
Sorry, just a point of clarification, just because of something this group has said so often, that, the focus, if I understand correctly, historically, we've continued to reiterate the focus is in where you get those economies of scale. And a lot of you are focusing on HOAs or larger projects and not individual homeowners, and same with grants. So is that a disconnect between the report and what's actually happening in Colorado?
Well, I think the focus is, you mean because we're taking more of a homeowner-based focus instead of a...
Yeah, is anyone taking a homeowner-based approach?
Historically, we've always focused more on single-family residential. It's only been in the last probably 3 years that we've focused on HOA and commercial properties, Fort Collins utilities.
Right.
But we have hundreds of single-family residential Xeriscape incentive program participants over the last, we've had a project or a program in place since 2016. So yeah, we're happy to provide any data that might be useful.
And I think most of Resource Central's work has been with homeowners, not with other types of property owners. So, but I think that information is extremely useful as well. Yeah. Well, I think taking your suggestion, we should follow up some more with other members. Of course, we haven't talked to.
Yeah, just one question. I think for me, one thing I struggle with personally is with providing incentive programs, we're essentially taking public money and then providing them to individuals or institutions to make these changes. And I'm wondering if that's probably outside of the scope of what you're doing, but I guess my concern is that we're
being fair with that money, that money that's being spent from public money is providing a public benefit to everybody who's contributed to that incentive. So I don't know if that's part of what you're doing, but it's just a question that keeps me up at night here and there.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very legitimate question. We struggle with it too. And I do think it's something that's, I don't think it's something that we can really quantify very well, but it's something that I think we need to keep considering and sort of keep attention focused on that issue, because there is sort of a fairness aspect of this. There's it's sort of a social justice component to it potentially.
Yeah, because we don't want to take public money and then essentially help people just wealthy people upgrade their landscapes.
Right.
Like that's the potential pitfall.
Right? Yeah, no, I agree.
So it just seems like there needs to be a demonstrable, now I'm getting on my soapbox like Drew here. There needs to be a demonstrable public benefit for those investments.
Or maybe a specific effort to try to make sure that some of these dollars flow to folks that are not, just the largest water users, largest property owners, and, on the list.
Well, I mean, we face a similar statement to what Catherine cares about a little bit. And so one of the things we've tried to do with our investment in public resources is to transition the landscape industry into more appropriately adopting budget line items for these investments, and kind of move their business model a little bit, and then to square the processes that those budget items are paying for. So I think that's the way we've tried to conceptualize this, is if we can perfect that model and then get it common practice, we can then step out of the incentive game. But I don't know how long that'll take.
I just want to say clear, like, this isn't public money. This is ratepayer money that is used generally in most water providers on the Front Range in an enterprise way that the ratepayers pay for the services that the utility provides. So it's not general fund. It can't be used on anything. It has to be used for the benefit of the utility. And I think there have been several studies, Westminster first among them back in 2014, about the long-term economic benefits of water efficiency, since replicated by many utilities. Our tap fees are lower today because of our conservation efforts over time. Rates are lower. So I really do think ways that we can, any kind of water saving activities, have a very direct line into providing the large scale benefit for all customers, that they are paying less for their service today had we not done the conservation. So I don't stay up at night. I don't want to stay up at night worrying about whether or not my conservation programs are helping my community.
Yeah, no, I don't think in terms of, I feel very comfortable with our conservation program doing that. I guess what I'm concerned about is landscape transformation is not only, at this point in time, it's not only ratepayer dollar, it's also state money.
Right.
That's
exactly.
So now we're talking about disparities, not only within a ratepayer class, but also a state different. So I think this becomes more complex. We've got to.
That's a good, yeah.
I'm just raising my hand on behalf of Greg and us online. Maybe Greg, you had your hand raised first.
Opportunities to others.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to, I don't know, a couple of thoughts here. One is that, and I think a lot of people are in this situation. So we're not looking, if you look 10 or 20 years out, we're hoping we don't have to buy every square foot of grass that's going to be replaced. And so I think this cultural shift that we're all trying to affect really will, in the end, reduce the costs overall. I know we're sort of adding up what we're doing right now, but I think a lot of conservation programs, if you can move the market on things, really end up being a lot cheaper than we originally think. So I would at least want some, Doug, I don't know if you have any thoughts about how to fold that into your report, but I think it's important to think about how, maybe the grass we avoid in new developments, either through legislation or just that cultural view, could be valued in some way.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, Greg. And in some of the research, especially on the Southern Nevada program, they did go out to try to quantify the sort of neighbor effect of turf replacement, if you will, and they were able to come up with some pretty solid estimates of so say you incentivize 200 acres of turf replacement in your service area, how much additional turf replacement is going to occur as people see those landscapes? Well, Greg, while you're on the line, I have a question for you. We talked about turf acres a little bit here. Where are you guys in terms of any estimates of how much non-essential turf is in your service area?
Oh, it's a great question. So we're still working on it, but I will tell you when the MOU first came out, we did a basic estimate that we thought there were 6,000 non-functional turf. What that includes is public areas like rights of way, medians, commercial properties that we thought were non-functional. It does not include the park system, so including Denver parks. It also does not include residential areas. We didn't feel comfortable. We knew Sensory and her group were doing their own estimate, and so they didn't have anything at the time. And we continue to not be comfortable trying to pass judgment on whether people's lawns are functional or not. So 6,000 is kind of the number we're working with. 30% of that would be in 1,800 acres of grass, but we know there's more in the Sensory. I don't know if you have a number for Denver parks itself.
Not for Denver parks. We know right now with some of the data we're looking at that 12,000 acres in Denver are turf, and again 76% of that is full family home lawns. So we're now trying to back into a number for publicly owned turf, including Denver parks, of what that could be there yet.
Thank you, guys.
I think Russ had a hand raised online too.
Oh, hey everyone, I just wanted to echo, yeah, I thought good points on the funding, and maybe just to hit on both sides. At state funding, they're not all monies created equal. So I think it's absolutely right that the way the turf legislation came through to us, that's coming out of general funds. So that I think inherently does have some of the potential hangups with equities. People are paying into that maybe don't even have a lawn and aren't getting any benefit from that, arguably. If we do, like we just funded the largest grant that we've ever funded out of the water conservation category for turf replacement to the tune of just over 1.5 million that's going to Resource Central to kind of double down and expand their efforts and really make some inroads even more on the West Slope. And I think that's a great example of where we're using water plan grant funds that are more coming from a severance tax base. And depending on how you feel about that, I'm sure there's some discussions there, but it seems to me a little bit more inherently equitable source of funding. And then as Drew noted, I mean, if you're at the municipal scale, I think this is kind of some of the inherent equity hangups is if, your goal is to save water, you're probably going to target the people that have the biggest lawns. And from an equity standpoint, that traditional wasters are probably not the disadvantaged community that haven't had the ability to even necessarily pay the water bill or to have a lawn, or have maybe decided to just let that whatever greenery they had go, and maybe it's doubling down on historic inequities where they don't even have trees in their community. So there's a lot of issues there, but it does seem to me that some rate structures, like City of Boulder's, at least historically the way that was set up is that the tier 4 and 5 ratepayers, especially tier 5, ended up not only paying for the conservation program, so they're inherently putting in the money that is then paying for all programs that are going. And certainly you can invest in giving free gardens out if you wanted with some of that money, but it's also helping offset the base rate. So there was the tier 1 was actually a lower than base rate, which was meant to really I guess incentivize conservation or reward people that were conserving the most, but it also inherently supports from an equity lens those that are using less water and maybe could actually even plant something in the yard without getting loved or hit with a higher rate.
Okay. Thanks, Russ. Any other comments? All right, then we'll. Thanks.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Okay, so we are running behind a little bit, but that's okay because it was all good conversations. Frank, I'm gonna put you to work on this because I have some animation in my slides, me a lot of clicking. But whenever you're ready, just want to go over the timeline still what we have left. The first slide is going to be the same timeline we showed you last time minus our last meeting. Nothing's changed as far as where we're looking to go forward. So today, like I said earlier, we're going to be discussing that 8th question that we have not covered yet. So the yeah, that works too. Thank you.
Sorry.
Oh, you're good. Guys, it's the same as last time. So we're still having that discussion in the afternoon. The report draft, we're working on sending it out right now. Thank you for your flexibility for it not yesterday. Probably wouldn't have been great to get it at 5 o'clock in the afternoon anyway. But maybe Drew, he would read it.
It wouldn't have been.
So yeah, thank you for that. We just wanted to make sure that we were capturing everything. We have talked about a lot over the last 6 months. Just 6 months for 3 days away from that. So there's been a lot that we've covered. There's been a lot of considerations outside of these 8 questions. We've been working to include it all. On the next slide, I'll go over more about specifics with how we provide that feedback, but you will have between now and November 17th for that feedback session. And then we'll be reviewing that, kicking it back to you a few times, going over that. So our next meeting will be virtual. This is our last in-person meeting. So December 7th, we'll be bringing the new version of the report based on everything that we've heard, sending it back to you. And then we'll highlight, any big changes, any major things to look at. That meeting might not necessarily need to be the full 5-6 hours. I know how much everyone loves sitting on Zoom for 5 or 6 hours though, so apologies if that's what you're looking forward to, but that will depend on what the editing process looks like. It might need more time, it might not. So we'll go with the flow of that as that comes up. And then after that final review, we will be sending it to the governor's office for review because that is a requirement of CWCB. And then January, the plan is to have it out and ready for the public. So we just want to make sure that through the editing process on the next slide that everybody is comfortable with what we're putting out. So very soon that draft will be sent out in an Adobe PDF that will be shareable, viewable by everybody. So any of your comments, feedbacks, suggestions, grammatical corrections, one is enough. You don't all have to comment on them. Will be viewed by each other. So because we have that whole month, but the sooner you can start providing that feedback, the more your fellow task force members can comment on it, the more they can build on it and say, yes, I like this idea, or provide more nuance to it. That way we can get a better idea of, the general look of the task force. So it will be collaborative. Again, I want to offer the suggestion that if you want to send any feedback, any comments directly to us, please feel free to. It's helpful to include it, but also want to respect that if you don't want to say it to the group, you don't have to. And so what to contribute, did we miss anything? It's a lot of material that we covered. I've reviewed our videos way too many times. It's embarrassing how many times I've watched everyone here speak over the last 6 months on repeat. But if we missed something, please tell us and be as specific as you can with that. Just don't say you forgot something. It's not super helpful. So the more details you can provide, the more we can include in it. If we misrepresented anything, please let us know. If there's technical details that might be way over my head and might be your expertise, please let us know, just so that we can keep improving. And then what do you agree with? If there's stuff on there that you're like, absolutely, this is super important, there's a possibility that can be moved up in the report, maybe more highlighted. So it's important that we know both what you maybe don't like, but also what you do like. And yeah, again, any grammatical errors, there's going to be a few, I promise. Just let us know, we'll fix them. Yeah, so that's essentially the process of it. If you have any questions about how to provide those comments on Adobe, please let us know. Should be fairly straightforward and simple, and then you're able to interact with everybody else's comments. So our goals really is to represent what you all are saying, what you all have been saying. That's number one. We want to make the editing process as accessible and easy. That's why we're going this route. We were looking at different options, and this just seemed like the most straightforward that we can collaborate. So from you, we're looking for editing. We're looking for, refinement. If it's a one-off comment that maybe nobody else, supports on or agrees. Maybe it won't be included in there. It's all going to depend on what we're getting. So we will be considering all of it. And then again, we'll have that next review session December 7th, so we can talk through any of the changes that were there. If you have any case studies or ideas for what we should highlight, there will be some call out boxes when you see the report. There's an example of one for One Water. It's really short. It's not going to be super high detail and in depth, but there's anything that you're like, wow, this section really needs just a little bit more information, let us know. Also, if you have photos that you want us to include, those would be really helpful. I don't think you'll be able to send those on the PDF, so that would be an example of sending them straight to us. But yeah, that's the general gist of what we're looking for the report. It's been really fun to go back and see what we've all been talking about, because we have come a long way in the last 6 months. And on a personal level, I started with CWCB 6 months ago today, which is why I know that we're 3 days short of our first meeting, because our first meeting was my 3rd day of work. So your impact and your just input on all of this and all the time that you have all spent has been really amazing to be a part of, and has been a big part of my job here at CWCB and has helped define it. So I just want to thank you all for all of your work. Also on behalf of CWCB, we're just very grateful for all the information we learn every time we talk to you. Please keep sending all the information that you have, even when this is over, because it's also really helpful. But yeah, just thank you so much for your time. We're hoping that the report is what you're all saying, but if it's not, tell us and we'll keep going. So if anyone has any questions about any of this. Yes.
I have 2 things. First is a process question. What are your thoughts on us sharing the draft with our internal teams to have a collective review and those comments? Or do you prefer it be just the people appointed to the force?
That is a good question. I don't know, Russ, if you have more thoughts on that.
Sure.
Go ahead.
I can jump in, and I'll note too, I think Kat was gonna maybe say, but Kat's a lifesaver, and we're having some tech issues with getting that sent out, but you should all have emails. They'll come from Kat or Adobe, but you should have those in your inboxes now. On sharing, I think what we are trying to avoid is, you know, one of the reasons, and we did this before with kind of initial edits on water plan, is just having a little bit more of a secure system where it can't get shared with the world. You know, this is the chance to refine things, not and make sure that we're putting our best foot forward to the world, not have it get speared off the bat. So you're getting a personalized link. If you want to bring folks into your office and talk about it, I mean, I don't begrudge that at all, but I'd rather make sure that we're just getting one set of comments from each task force member, and we'll leave it to you if you feel like you need to bring in other experts for a perspective.
Then the other point is December 5th, 6th, and 7th is the North American Water Loss Conference in Denver, put on by AWWA. I would imagine a lot of people will be attending that. I'm not sure if there's others in this room who are planning to, but
okay,
it does intersect with this planned last meeting date.
That's a good note. We'll send out a poll to see if that date still works for everybody. Thank you. That's helpful to know, because if nobody showed up, we'd be like, we did it. We, you know, no comments. So thank you.
And Frank, oh, sorry, Drew. Frank, just on that note, I wanted to just say that, you know, I think, and maybe Jenna covered this, but I think our thoughts is to, you know, keep that meeting relatively short, to just share the feedback that we incorporated, and then almost make any longer part office hours for anybody that wants to take a deeper dive, so that not everybody's holding on. So, you know, Frank, in your case, if you submit comments and you're like, I'm pretty good with this, you know, it's up to you how much time you really want to invest in that, but we can also see if an alternate date works if a lot of people are having that conflict.
Can you talk about who the we is on the CWCB side that's going to be reviewing the comments and edits? Is it your whole team? Is it Marjo? Like who's involved?
I mean, Marjo will have access to the comments, have access to the document. We'll be able to see it. But yeah, so the we will be the people that you've seen here. So Kat, Russ, if we need to pull in Jeff or Sam, who've been on either the virtual or in-person meetings, it'll be our group, the same people you've been working with. So it won't be
CWCB staff.
Yeah, correct.
And do we also have like when we set this out, we kind of have a team of supporting agency contributors. So folks like Scott at DOLA, and then, augment staff on our team like Kevin will look at this as well. So we'll have a few other voices in there. And I think a lot of that is really just to make sure we didn't miss some opportunity or mischaracterize something. But predominantly, I think this group will be the one providing edits.
Cool.
And I just wanted to tag it back at you, Jenna, what you just said, and thank, Marjo, thank all of the CWCB staff. It's a good experience. We really appreciate you taking this on. And I was gonna ask how long it was, kind of dreading the answer, and I see it is 27 pages with lots of pictures. So thank you for that too.
It was definitely a lot of work to try to represent everything that we heard and also keep it short. And I imagine on that note, which is it may extend, A, because of comments that you have, or B, because of, I think that there might be some opportunities, for example, Laura, to have even, maybe a few more call out boxes. Like it might be nice where we're talking about capacity building at the local level to reference WRA's work and the grant that you got from us to do that. So if there's helpful things that would be good to sprinkle in there, or if we just, for ADA compliance reasons, have to increase font size or things like that, I could see it stretching out, but hopefully it won't be tremendously longer.
Anyone else? Also, if any questions come up, we're here. So always ask them. But yeah, thank you for all of it. I'm excited for everyone to see it. And hopefully you'll pay attention the rest of the day and not just read it. But I also get that it's tempting to look at. So
well, you have 15 extra minutes right now. So there is that. We went from being behind to ahead. So if lunch is available, we could break now, or
lunch is available, and we have Jeff Stala to join the group for the tour of the interpretive area. So we could activate him if you'd like to start earlier.
Before lunch?
it was in during.
Well, we were hoping that we would take the box lunch out there, out to the interpretive area where we have some sitting areas, and then we would have a presentation on what that program's about.
Okay. Are y'all game?
Yeah.
Great. Well, which direction are we heading for box lunch? Is it out this way?
It's out this way. You'll see lunch and drinks are available. You can fill your bottle if you would like. Did you see it on the way in? Okay. Oh, it's outside the. Yes, if you.
Certainly happy to have some conversation as well. One piece of background, just for the fun of it, I am actually a Colorado native. I live in Washington, D.C. now, so that's where I'm coming from. But my dad worked for the CWCB for 25 years. I worked for the state of Colorado for 10 years. So just having the chance to engage with folks from Colorado, I'm very jealous that you are all there and I'm not, but just delighted to be here for the conversation today. So I'll just give you a very high level, and Waverly just saw you pop up on the screen. Very good to see you. Just to let you know a little bit of what I'll be talking about, I'll give you an overview of who we are at Argonne and specifically our research center. Just a little bit about our building resilience and economic development research and how that might tie back to drought-related conversations. And then in particular at the end, touch a little bit on strategies and financing. And again, please feel free to interrupt. I can't necessarily see the chat while I'm presenting, but happy to answer any questions as we go along. So for those who may not be familiar with the Department of Energy National Laboratory System, there are 17 national laboratories across the country. Argonne is based in the Chicago area. We are a sister laboratory to the National Renewable Energy Laboratory there in Golden. My team is one small part of a much larger laboratory. Laboratory-wide, we have missions as diverse as nuclear energy, advanced climate modeling, supercomputing, and other research. We are also a DOE user facility, so organizations, nonprofits, other research organizations, the private sector can use some of the unique facilities that we have to advance their research. Our team, the National Economic Research and Resilience Center, specifically works with organizations like the U.S. Economic Development Administration and more recently the Department of Energy to provide economic data access. We provide modeling and simulation, program evaluation services, and then as to the conversation today, a number of research reports that are focused on topics of interest to the economic development and broader community resilience research agendas. So I have shared my slides with Jenna. She can share those out afterwards. We have a few embedded links in the presentation. This conversation is focused on drought. We do have some tools as you start to think from a resilience context. What is the makeup of our economy? What does that capacity look like? How do considerations like water quality, stream quality, infrastructure fit in? We have a couple of publicly available data tools with data available at both a county level for every county in the country and at a regional level as well. Our National Economic Resilience Data Explorer, or as we affectionately call it, the NERDI, as well as an Economic Development Capacity Index. All of our tools are publicly facing and really designed to help inform decision-making. So to help in many ways to inform discussions like all of you are having today. This report that came across, I believe, Jenna and Russ's desk is one in a series of topics that we've covered over the course of the last year. And really what we were aiming to do was to situate how economic development specifically fits into the broader conversation around resilience. I think it's important to note that the state of Colorado and communities in Colorado are really national leaders in this conversation. So a lot of this may not be new to you. Anything from the Colorado Climate Plan that CWCB and many others have worked on to the work that the Colorado Resiliency Office does. There's a really rich base of knowledge and activity there in Colorado that I think can help to inform conversations like this. But just to level set how a resilience conversation might be different from a typical response or emergency management conversation, rather than thinking of just natural disasters or threats or notions of vulnerability, the resilience conversation talks a lot about the notion of shocks, of stressors, and really the interaction between those. So when we think about a shock, it could be a sudden, unexpected event that disrupts the normal functioning of a community. Anything from the High Park fire or any of the floods in 2013 or otherwise that occurred while I lived in the state, to the COVID-19 pandemic, to other acute situations like a departure of a major employer, the disruption of a critical economic channel, or again, natural and human-caused disasters. So those shocks are really sudden, they're unexpected, they are things that happen to a community in a very acute way. However, they interact a lot with stressors or those long-term persistent community challenges. In a drought context, that could be aging, undersized, or just not perfectly designed infrastructure. That could be environmental degradation. You think a lot about watershed health far upstream from where you sit at Northern Water and how that might affect water supplies. Persistent impacts of poverty and inequality, which can cascade throughout the community. There's a lot of research on disasters that show folks that are of lower income populations tend to be more significantly impacted by disasters. And those can play out in the community over time. Even things like a lack of economic diversity, and as you're thinking about outdoor recreation, if you have a major drought or a wildfire in an economy that's largely dependent only on outdoor recreation, they may be more vulnerable to community-wide impacts. So a lot of when you're having that resilience conversation, it's thinking about both shocks and stressors. Now, drought is sort of an interesting blend of the two in some ways, where they can be acute and fairly sudden in onset, but they can also be something, as you all know, out west can last for years and years and require longer term adaptation strategies or new normals as compared to the way that things may have been in previous decades. So you have to think about it sort of in both contexts, but at the end of the day, again, from a resilience conversation, it's about understanding not just a shock or a stress, but the interactions between the two and how those play out throughout a community or through an economy. So I'm not going to go into full detail. If you read the report that we released, this table is very focused on the economic development related conversation, but all of it goes to say that resilience is a broad, cross-organizational, cross-disciplinary conversation. It is not all focused on what government can do. You have roles for local, regional, state governments, tribal governments, academic institutions, nonprofit organizations, the private sector. Utilities may be part of a local government. They may be something slightly different and can fit in different places, but there are different concrete actions that can be taken to address chronic stressors on an ongoing basis, actions that can be taken before a shock or a disaster were to occur so that you lessen the impacts or set your community or organization up to be able to recover more quickly and hopefully bounce forward. And then those actions that are taken after that disaster or that shock event takes place. You'll hear over and over again, a lot of that comes back to establishing those relationships across those different types of organizations and disciplines, taking multidisciplinary action, considering multiple benefits in the actions that you take, and really taking a long view in that conversation as well. And that goes to the notion of systems thinking. A conversation that we had frequently when I was still at the state and Waverly was as well, is that notion of integrating planning efforts. So from a utility or a water perspective, there may be drought planning or water planning that's occurring, but water planners also have a key role to play in, say, local hazard mitigation plans or state hazard mitigation plans that are often run through emergency management agencies, or those comprehensive plans where land use and building requirements are really contemplated. And vice versa, having some of those voices that you may not typically have at the table in water planning. So thinking about the connection back to the economy and how central water can be to, say, outdoor recreation or other components of the economy, bringing those voices in, which leads to the next point, which is about really fostering not just short-term collaboration, but that long-term collaboration so that you can identify those more sort of systemic solutions. One of those collaborations I often go back to from a flood recovery perspective was the partnership between the Water Conservation Board, the Colorado Department of Transportation, local watershed coalitions, where multi-objective actions were taken to rebuild roadways after the 2013 floods, to improve ecosystems, to improve water quality, all as a part of a more comprehensive effort. From a drought and water perspective, there's also a preparing for new technologies. In the economic development space, we think about technologies that can both be additive, but also those that are disruptive, but understanding that there are new techniques and ways of doing things is a big part of the resilience conversation. And then, of course, addressing equity and understanding how both through engagement, but through action, you can reach underserved populations, you can engage with and provide meaningful opportunities for engagement and hopefully change those outcomes at the end of the day. There are some great resources for integrated planning in Colorado from a number of state agencies, from a number of professional associations and others. One just to highlight from my time there being the Planning for Hazards Guide that highlights different types of planning approaches, land use approaches unique to Colorado that can be used both to improve water quality, to conserve water, and address some of those really acute drought challenges. So I talked a little bit about the who, the how. What are some implementation strategies that we found in our research from across the country From a people perspective, I've already touched on this a lot, but really the building and sustaining those cross-organizational and cross-disciplinary teams, having a dedicated team that can have a conversation exactly like what all of you are having right now, on a more localized scale, establishing relationships with emergency managers, and in some cases, either at the community or the state level, chief resilience officers. Colorado was one of the first states to have a chief resilience officer, and they're a great resource to have this more sort of holistic conversation. From a planning perspective, incorporating thinking about those shocks and those stressors that I talked about, as well as future conditions into water planning efforts, thinking about dependencies and interdependencies between natural systems that you all may manage, built social and community systems and economic systems, understanding how impacts to water or natural systems from a drought may reverberate out through the economy and beyond. And that there's a unique role you can play in participating in other community planning processes. And as I said before, bringing those other voices into your own planning processes. From a policy standpoint, there are lots of different tools at a state or a national scale. Legislation can really advance resilience priorities. The update to the Colorado Disaster Emergency Act, for example, a number of years ago, codified resilience as a mission at the state, but more locally, identifying the appropriate land use codes, design standards for your own infrastructure can be really beneficial from a resilience perspective. And then from a project and program perspective, multi-objective, multi-benefit thinking. And also, how do you consider future conditions in project or program design? So just for example here, Argonne does some very high resolution downscale climate data modeling. There's data available where you can look at annual daily maximum precipitation or total precipitation trends. I have a nice little 12-kilometer square on the Berthoud area up on the screen, and you can see that, well, total rainfall may be projected to be up at mid-century or end of century. At the same time, there'll be an increase in summer daily maximum heat index and things like that. So you're going to have potentially more rainfall or more snow, but also higher temperatures, which may lead to more evaporation. That's concrete information that can be used both in planning processes and beyond. And then finally, from a funding perspective, and I run the risk of going a little bit over time, but something when I was working at the state, but really is reflective of the national conversation, is that there is no singular funding or financing source that can address all of the resilience challenges, whether you're focused specifically on an individual sector or the full big picture. So it's really taking a portfolio-based approach, integrating resilience considerations into internal processes like annual budgeting. Is there criteria to think about what your resilience priorities are in that annual budgeting process, or how you evaluate what are the priorities in a capital improvements plan? I'll mention the city of New Orleans is one place that directly incorporated resilience criteria into their capital improvement planning process. So as they were thinking about the next 20, 30, 50 years of infrastructure investments, they were thinking about resilience. There are a number of grant resources, loans, loan programs, whether implemented by the state or at the federal level. More locally, there may be resources like user fees, special assessments, or otherwise that can be used to build that more sort of comprehensive financing portfolio. When the slides get sent out, I do have a few links embedded. I will mention that the Federal Emergency Management Agency, through their Hazard Mitigation Assistance Program, does have eligibility criteria for some drought-specific projects, whether that's aquifer recharge or watershed restoration projects, things along those lines. So if you've participated in your local mitigation planning process and you have projects that might be a fit, that's a great time to contact the Colorado Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management to find out about how those hazard mitigation assistance programs work. So have some links embedded in there. And then HUD more recently has built a future funding navigator. It's mostly an inventory of other federal agency programs, but builds that good awareness of what resources might be available. But again, that bottom line, that portfolio-based approaches, being able to bring multiple funding sources together is really the model that we're seeing a lot of. So I have covered the majority of the content that I wanted to cover today. Again, you can go to our website, sign up for our mailing list, and Jenna and Russ, I'm happy to answer any questions if helpful, but just appreciate the chance to be able to speak to you.
Great, thank you. Any comments or questions? All right, then we'll transition to Russ.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ian.
Yeah, I also wanted to say thanks to Ian. Ian and I have overlapped in past life as well, and have some mutual friends, including one of Ian's team, Greg Hubert, who used to be Chief Resilience Officer for City of Boulder, and we worked really closely together. So Jenna has a slide, I think, and I'm guessing it might be the most boring slide in the deck because it's literally just my bullets. So I'm sorry about that. But if you can put that up, Jenna, then I'll kind of speak to that. I think the main thing we wanted to tee up is a conversation that we hadn't spent much time on that we last talked about at the Drought Summit. And I think we got enough input there. I mean, if for those of you who have glanced at the report, I think we kind of tee things up as recommendations could come in three forms. They're either the things that we all generally feel pretty good about needing to advance, things that are forthcoming on the horizon that we think we should be on the lookout for, that are kind of pending or maybe have just come out, and then the things that maybe, and we heard a lot about that today, so maybe we're going to add to that list, need more research and analysis. We just don't know enough about to inform a decision on. And so I think maybe in this area of drought we might end up in that space of could use more research, or potentially be on the lookout for if there's information pending. So don't feel pressed to have an answer. In general, I just wanted to do honor to the conversation and recognize the connections between drought resilience planning and some of the stuff that Ian was talking about too, with just systems thinking, and this discussion that we're having around turf. So thank you for putting all those out there.
Not working for you, sorry about that.
Go ahead.
Okay, here we go. Still?
Yeah, we're good. Thank you.
So I think I just wanted to cover a few things that we had heard at the Drought Summit. And I know Greg's on, but I know Amy Moyer can't be with us. Also, Amy just had in, I think, September, a little baby. So hope that she's doing well and can't wait to have her back on full time. But I think just to do honor to this conversation, and I think a lot of what we heard, some of the task force discussion around, really echoed some of the things that we heard in water plan feedback. And in the report, I kind of tried to briefly summarize that too. But, we have just lived through some pretty deep drought years and some pretty unevenly distributed drought years, where at one point, and maybe over the course of a year, we had complete red on the west slope with extreme drought conditions. And then really the next year, almost the exact opposite, probably not as dire, especially in the eastern plains out by Sterling, but still drought. And then down in Baca County, I mean, Baca in the Arkansas really got beat up, but then it was relatively drought free on the west slope. So, in light of that, I think it creates some interesting conversations when we think about the way water moves across the state. And we heard a lot in just response to the water plan, even about, if a headwaters community is in drought, shouldn't the receiving community be in drought? I think it's important just to bring up that conversation, but I think we've heard some nuanced conversation, and I think we just really want to pay tribute to it. And I'm happy, when I get through with this, if Greg wants to jump in, but my takeaway was that when there are drought restrictions that are declared, that that might actually come with some pretty heavy triggers that reduce flexibility. Whereas when you're not in a strict drought condition, you might have more flexibility in your system to do some good things, potentially regionally, like leave some water in a stream or retime something, or really help out in a more productive way than when you're declaring, a actual drought restriction and some triggers get put in place that cause some, hey, we're going to divert everything we can. We're going to shore up our reservoirs, et cetera. That being said, I think we've seen a trend, and Denver Water again is a good example of this, and certainly wish everybody in the state would get there, of where embedding your stage 1 drought restrictions just become the new normal. Like if it's a voluntary restriction that is going to say, water less times a week, that's probably pretty in keeping with this call on the Water Plan in Action 1.7, and really kind of the backstop to this task force, in thinking about how we move to a future that's got more climate appropriate, not just landscape, but irrigation, where we could really get by on landscapes that maybe only need 1 day of watering a week. So moving to that future seems really inherently tied up in this drought discussion. We've seen some innovative, and I'm trying to think of my own line of logic here. I think I had some more text in here, but I will just say that, we've seen some innovative funding solutions, like River District and St. Vrain, putting in, mill levies that can augment what they can do locally. I think, again, to that systems thinking, they're certainly not put into one bucket. But just like we've funded drought or turf replacement at the state level, River District's also made some investments in that area too. I think we've both invested in some of the good work going on in Eagle County, for example. Rate structures I wanted to, speak to. We've talked a lot about that through this process, and I think just some of the conversation we had around this reinforce that water budgets, and that, a tiered rate structure combined with water budgets can at least provide maybe some more direct connections between people, connecting them to their water use, and really making them aware of when they're seeing a high water bill that they're outside of a expected norm of what would be the right amount of water per square foot outdoors. Or in the case they don't have separate metering, yes, they could have a toilet leak driving that up too. But the point is that it can get their attention to do something. And we talked earlier today about those kind of inherent equity issues that a rate structure like that might be able to support. The last thing I just wanted to note, and this is kind of tying back to Ian and my shout out to Greg, but as Ian noted, I think whether it's drought, fire, or flood, what we're really trying to do is just work towards long-term mitigation. Like these are issues that we work on every year, because the worst time to plan is when we're smack dab in the middle of a major issue. And I think Denver Water had noted, for example, that some of that long-term investment in water conservation, embedding those restrictions into their everyday kind of operations, really resulted in them not having to declare a drought for a couple of years. Maybe not, Greg, you can correct me, I don't think they were subsequent years, but I think you had mentioned 2 times where that was really an explicit tie back to some of your ongoing investment in conservation at Denver Water. Similarly, at City of Boulder, I think that this importance around kind of firewalling, some innovation funding that allows you to, when you're dipping into, maybe because of a natural disaster or because of a downturn in the economy, or what we've just really lived through has been both of those things at the same time, right? Fire, mudslides, drought, on top of a pretty depressed economy. It's really important to kind of firewall some funding that you can dip into to kind of not just fall back and shore things up, but really to continue to move forward. So at City of Boulder, one of the lessons learned from the 2013 flood, for example, was that some of that innovation investment that we had kept for investing in technology or training or software didn't take a hit during the aftermath of the flood, because some of that money was firewalled off. So it wasn't kind of budgeting down to the zero mark, but really putting some money aside, whether you want to call it a rainy day fund or an innovation fund or a resilience fund, to really invest in moving things forward, so that you're not taking a dip back as you move forward. So those are some disparate ideas, but I think just generally, we wanted to open up the conversation to you today and to really maybe scratch the surface of if there's any other ideas that anybody wanted to add into this discussion, and then explicitly think about when we're talking about turf removal, how we see that as one of those long-term investments in drought resilience, or of course the flip side of the coin is you're reducing the outdoor irrigation you can cut back and demand elasticity. But I think more of the discussion has kind of veered towards this is just the next 2.0 of our outdoor conservation efforts, and we need to focus there. So with all that said, I think Marja is going to lead us in a little bit of conversation that it opens it up for your thoughts.
I think I am. So let me just pause before I ask any specific questions and just take the first question that Russ asked is, is this, did we hear you right in terms of just some of the initial things he summarized, and then we'll sort of jump into what you guys are doing. But overall impressions in terms of, did he hear you right? No one's coming at you with a pitchfork, so I'm going to take that as a yes. Okay, so the question that was, if we go back to CWCB's original questions, which Jenna referred back to today, which I went back and checked what the question was again, was initially, are there economic pathways for earlier drought calls? And based on what Russ has just sort of presented as some of the things he's thinking about, it seems to me that question is actually larger and broader. To, you know, what are the innovations and creative solutions that you are using currently to both respond to those future droughts, which Ian referred to, which require, you know, a more temporary response, and what are the ways you are making investments, and those might be financial, those might be programmatic, they might be infrastructure, or they might be policy, but what are you doing that is more trying to think about how you achieve long-term adaptation in, you know, light of the fact that the West is becoming hotter and drier. And so the agendas kind of have, you know, 4 questions on there that are kind of related to that. But I think I'm going to start, before I kind of do follow-up questions, just sort of start with, you know, what are the things that you are currently doing that you feel are changing the way, staying the course in how you adapt to sort of the acute droughts, those sort of, you know, the things that are only supposed to come once in a while. But maybe the last one stayed past its welcome. But let's start there, and then we'll look at some of those longer term adaptations. We talked a lot about rate structures last meeting, so, you know, you can just say what we said last time on those.
I think it seems kind of hypocritical, but you almost need a plan for them, right?
Gotta shout because we're really far away.
I said, I think it seems a little hypocritical, but you almost have to plan for those kind of things and build in redundancy as best as you can in your system or in your watershed portfolio to make sure that when you do need to utilize that tool, that it's ready to go and that it's up to par with not necessarily skipping a beat in your operations, if we're talking infrastructure and operational and water security and things like that. So it's a little counterintuitive to say you should plan for it.
In terms of, we know it's coming.
Yeah, and it's becoming more normal.
Right. So, you know, kind of, I just read your drought plan recently. Have you changed, what would you say is the newest or most innovative thing that you guys took into your most recent drought plan?
I would say, like, one of the things that we did is, I think it was back in 17 and prior to that, I don't know when it was originally implemented, but we have Colorado River water rights that we never use. We pull primarily from the Grand Mesa. 1, the water quality is much better, and 2, it's just our preferred source. And so a long time ago, they had implemented this pump station in terms of, if we ever need to use it, have it. Well, then in 17, our system grew from the time that it was originally installed. So we upgraded it in 17, not thinking that we would have to use it again. And then in 21, we actually had to use that water to blend it to supplement the demand for our customers. So it was something like we shelved it for over 5 years after the upgrade, and we didn't use it before then, but we still made sure that we maintained the infrastructure so that when rubber met the road, we were able to implement it. But that's hard, right? Like, that's hard from a strategic planning to be pumping money into something that you're not using. Like, I could see where that's fat that could be trimmed if you're in a really tight budget season.
And did you have a funding mechanism that wasn't revenue driven to help pay for that?
We primarily upgrade like infrastructure and stuff based off of tap sales. So water rates cover operational costs, and then tap fees for the most part cover any infrastructure upgrade or capital improvement projects.
So you raised rates, tap fees. You haven't? I thought everyone in the county.
That's last year.
Okay. Oh.
Oh, I just wanted, I don't know if I'm answering the question correctly, so feel free to redirect my response. I really liked how I think Ian kind of put down the approach of kind of defining what resilience is and creating these 4 buckets. At least that's my understanding of people, planning, policies, and projects. And again, just trying to tie what we're doing here to that is making sure that we're not focused on just one bucket. I think that we need to have movement on all buckets. You know, as an example, one of our organizations, and we don't, you know, a lot of the projects that we put out, we don't rely on potable. You know, that's a movement that we put in place for the last decade. We don't do a lot of long-term potable irrigation. So it's resiliency for us is trying to design the system so that it can rely on the native environment, native rainfall, native soils, native plant palettes. But on the people side, so that's on the project side. The other example of the project side is like what Dominion spoke to, is really looking to these other sources and talking about water holistically. It's not just about potable and water recovery, but it's also about adding stormwater into the conversation. I think I like what he touched on the people side, is trying to really promote these cross-department, cross-objective, cross-people pollination, and making sure that it's not just a utility conversation or it's a stormwater conversation, but it is a utility planning, economic development, stormwater conversation all the time. I think that creates resilience. I just wanted to emphasize that point as we're thinking about this, just making sure we're talking about resilience broader and not just about, say, rate structure or about water conservation. So I don't know if that made any sense, but I just felt like I had to say that.
Raise your hand if it made sense. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. So it's not always just about the supply side. For those of you on the supply side, many of you are in utilities. How much of that approach is being integrated more and more? Or do you feel like you're still sort of in a silo?
Our stormwater department wasn't even in our public works and utilities department until 3 months ago.
I'm right there with you.
Whole separate area. Yeah, so no, we're not doing that.
I think Aurora's probably in a similar boat if 10 or his proxy still on. Like stormwater, public works just got moved into Aurora Water recently too. So very normal.
Yeah, super normal. I think the truly integrated planning, I think Denver Water aspired to do this a while ago. It sort of got tripped up in the Moffett related stuff, but we have a water supply plan that deals with our raw water source. We have our infrastructure master planning that does with our capital improvement projects for pipes. And we have a drought plan, which deals with, interruptions to supply, but, ne'er the twain shall meet. Like they're not integrated as a whole to find out the best optimal solution amongst all. We're still pretty silent.
One thing we've actually seen in,
sorry.
One thing we've seen in a jurisdiction we work in is actually they make us plan water supplies for a drought year at full irrigation requirements.
Yeah.
So with our non-potable supplies, we have to prove up more water so that we can irrigate our subdivision at full irrigation in a drought year.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
No, that's pretty standard. Like a classic water utility is like, yes, we need to meet the normal demands of our community during a drought.
Yes, we hear that.
But you're but in a drought, you're not going to be meeting the normal demands of your community because you're going to be in a drought, so you're going to be restricting. It's weird.
Patrick, do you have access to all that water then after dedication?
Essentially, no, it gets turned over. But we're overbuying water. So to satisfy this demand, because it takes a tremendous amount to fully irrigate a project in a drought. And so you're essentially overbuying water, and then the cost increases pretty tremendously.
what you're asking, Frank, is that in a drought,
Yeah.
you don't get to use the water that you bought because you have to follow the drought restrictions that the provider is saying that you don't get to get 100% of your use. Right, yeah.
But I think the interesting piece of that might be a continuation of that conversation is, okay, as we look forward and we plan for the drought that we know is going to happen over and over and over again, we just don't know exactly when or exactly how long it's going to last, but it will happen.
Mm-hmm.
So then we look at the landscape side that you're planning for. So you have this landscape that you're going to irrigate fully. So maybe if we change our expectations for the landscape, now we're irrigating fully at a lower level because the needs of the landscape are lower.
Correct.
Seems like that would make sense.
It definitely does.
So let's do that.
So would that be then the change? I mean, this is an interesting sort of like maybe the historical perspective was the drought will only last a year. So we're going to buy, I'm just trying to catch up because clearly I'm the dumb one in the room here on the logic. You historically in water allocation requirements had to buy an amount of water rights dedicated that would create a reserve technically that would get a subdivision through a drought period. But we know that no longer exists. We go into restrictions. Your suggestion is changing the assumption at the front end for the dedication requirement?
Well, it's kind of like what they were talking about with Dominion this morning and Sterling Ranch, because they started off talking about the 0.75 acre feet, and then they transitioned into, well, we don't need 0.75. Maybe it's more like 0.4, or maybe really it's more like 0.2 or 0.3. So, but here's, I'll put on my utility hat. From a utility perspective, when you turn over your water rights to me, now I have to service all my customers. That's my responsibility, not yours. So that's the other side.
Right. Where we really see it come in with non-potable supplies that have very different yield throughout years. So you're overbuying non-potable supplies to buffer for that drought year.
So when I ask him for more water, it's an insurance policy.
Correct. Right. It's a way to meet future supply needs, not necessarily the need of that particular subdivision.
Because I know that no matter what happens, Russ is going to overwater anyway.
Yeah.
Russ is
Come on.
Okay. So that
Greg Fisher's.
okay, Greg.
Thanks. Yeah, I think this is a really interesting conversation. I think about it the same way, and Andrea, I'd be really curious, going through a year like this where I'm guessing most utilities revenues looked a lot like they were under drought restrictions. It occurs to me that as we get more lower water using landscapes, our revenues won't depend as much on those hot, dry years. And in the same way, I think you were talking about long-term planning, that if we just set that standard lower, that our revenues will be able to adapt over time. So that was one thing that I was thinking about, that one of the things that we've done, I think on the more innovative side of drought planning, is that we have a process that kicks into place quickly to reduce our expenses in the short term. So really having a good financial plan to weather droughts, because I've been through a few of them and see the huge financial pressure that is put on water providers. And I think we end up making decisions that we would rather not make if we weren't under that financial pressure. So I think that's a key part of planning, and conservation for that matter, just being ready for changes in revenues and how you get them with conservation and landscape change.
And are all of you kind of experiencing that in terms of revenue fluctuations or challenges with meeting your revenue during drought years?
How about meeting revenue in wet years? with no
I was
water?
gonna say this year was probably even
Same
worse.
thing.
Years like, no, that's. what he's
I mean, yeah, our water sales were down this year primarily because of the spring. Because nobody needed to use it.
So are you adapting or are you using your rate structures to create that sort of stability regardless?
We implemented a water supply reserve fund, which we can use for a variety of projects, but it's got. I don't know exactly the magnitude of it. I'm not sure where that money comes from, but it's really helpful to offset those unexpected challenges, but also to take advantage of unexpected opportunities. That if there's water that is available for lease or something like that, we have the money set aside to take advantage of both of those. That's something I think we did pretty recently, but it's been very helpful.
I just asked a quick question. How do you decide when to tap into the reserve? Like
That's
at what point do
question.
you?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but we should find out.
Usually in the politics of setting up that kind of thing, there are some guidelines about under what circumstances you can use this fund.
Right, because you don't know how long it's going to last.
Yeah.
Whatever the circumstances that's making you tap into it, right?
Okay. And what about this notion that, I think it's been thrown out before, like not every community has, day and time of week watering restrictions in place seasonally. It's like less than half of Colorado, I think. Most of you, I think, do that are here, but not all of the state. What did you have to change? Like a lot of communities use that as their first, if there's a drought, that's the first thing they do. They go to, voluntary and then mandatory day and time of week in their drought plans. Kind of like old school, but what did you have to change in order to make that policy permanent, or did it even matter? And is that not an effective sort of long-term solution?
We currently don't have one. And it's been our collective drought response information project committee who said, regardless of county commissioners or the lack of leadership embracing this locally, we're going to develop a suggested outdoor watering schedule just to give people some guidance. It's kind of low-hanging fruit in our opinion that something should be established, but yet it's still not. And we always have to preface it by saying it's suggested, we can't tell you how to use irrigation water. But we've seen a lot of great response from our community in just the guidance of we just want to be educated. We're a first-time homeowner. We never had to water our own lawns before. We just don't even know where to start. So for us, I would say it's kind of like passing the bag. Nobody really wants to come out and be odd numbered houses water on this day for this long, evens on this day at this long. I don't know if individual HOAs have those. We've heard of some that do and some that don't, but you're not going to get very far if only 6 HOAs are doing it in your community.
Fort Collins Utilities is in the same boat. We have no daytime, day of the week, seasonal irrigation limitations. We actually just had a conversation with council last Tuesday about it, and we're told again, wasn't something they wanted us to pursue.
We just adopted
an
it
election
in
year, so I might have had something.
We adopted, I think, in 2019, I believe. 2019.
For growing water smart, right?
Yeah, and it was we just had to update our water shortage ordinance. So we had an existing water shortage ordinance, and we added that in there. And mandatory, rules that are in place all year round, except for the time of day is only during the summer, so people don't slip on icy sidewalks. But I think it's been really good. We got pretty significant water savings out of the first year, and it created this ethic. The challenge is just, what do you do with enforcement? And my colleague has really, what we've landed on is that we are going to educate first and then enforce later. But we found a pretty good response with education. So there's an algorithm that detects whether or not somebody's watering more than 3 days a week, because we say you choose the days, just water 3 days a week. And then if they get a first letter, and then I think they get a second letter, but then I think we sent 12,000 letters this year. Only 2,000 got a second letter. So really 80% of the customers changed their behavior just from sending educational letters. We still have the right to enforce it, but we've only, you know, that's very rare that we would actually go down that path. So I think it's a worthwhile effort. It just requires a pretty significant investment in the education component. And, but I think it's worth it because now we have that aid. We are able to tell our landscapers, like, you need to design your landscapes to be watered 3 days a week or less. You know, it's a pretty clear rule that they can understand that sets a limit in lieu of a water budget. But
and how did it change your drought response?
You know, I think one thing that's so we used to be in voluntary restrictions all the time. Now we're in permanent 3 days a week water restrictions. So our drought response will be going to 2 days a week watering restrictions first. But it did change the levels in the ordinance and the actions that are called for the different triggers, but really tweaked those as opposed to just, you know, the big change was going from this is our voluntary structure. Now it's not voluntary anymore. It's permanent and it's forever. But hopefully it keeps us out of drought because we're preserving more reservoirs.
There's the goal, right?
Allison.
Okay, Allison. Allison.
Hi, got it. Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say, sorry, my mouse wasn't working. So I don't know all the details on our drought planning, but I do know that we implemented permanent 3-day-a-week watering restrictions, I believe, after the 2012 drought. And we're in the process of, we're going to update and redo our drought plan. But part of the theory, as I understand it, after the 2012 was to basically avoid having to go into a drought restriction in the future. So sort of to, you know, the conversation and the language has been around treating this as not, you know, we're not in like a drought this year and not a drought next year, but we're dealing with 20 years of sort of long-term drying and aridity, and that by not yo-yoing, and I think the idea is probably to prevent people from going back to a higher level of watering. And I wasn't around at that time, so I'm not sure how much of an impact it made. And there's other things that prevented some of the drought restrictions from being as effective as intended, and we're working on those now. But I do think it was effective, you know, to the extent we saw a difference initially. And then I would just echo that enforcement on the watering days is definitely a challenge. You know, we have some of those algorithms as well. They need some refinement, you know, and the staff time to kind of dedicate to that. So that's something that we're working on, that my team is working on specifically, hopefully for next year, is, you know, kind of what's the best way to do that, what works. It's great to hear that a first letter, you know, that you guys have found that to be effective, because that was kind of our sense also. But I think that becomes the big question. You know, we get people calling, not all the time, but people call on their neighbors. And often they want to know, like, what's the justice? You know, so there's kind of funny, like, community thing that can happen with it. But I think the awareness, because I would also say that I think there's a kind of a limited awareness of the fact that we even have 3 days a week watering. I think the landscapers know, but I think a lot of people who manage their own landscape and their own irrigation have absolutely no idea. And frankly, most of them probably don't use enough water for it to be a huge issue. So it, you know, becomes this kind of interesting dynamic between, you know, as a communications campaign, as an enforcement campaign, and as kind of maybe targeting the people who use the most and have the resources to have managers, and those people, by getting that message, maybe that helps us. So for whatever that's worth.
Hand up. Waverly.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to the conversation a little bit by providing some anecdotal information, which is to say that after our Growing Water Smart workshops, we open up technical assistance grant applications for $10,000 in grant funding. And we're about to close our round at the end of this week, but the 2 applications we've received so far have both been for updating drought management plans. And so just very interesting, both communities in northern Colorado that feel that they need to kind of revise and update their water shortage contingency plans and their drought management plans in order to be sort of prepared with the right stages and required actions for their community members to take. So just wanted to put that out there as kind of an interesting trend that we're seeing from the Sonoran Institute side.
Thanks. So kind of 2 follow-up questions, and then we'll just sort of maybe go a little more broadly here. But the way the original question was written was, are there economic pathways for earlier drought calls? And what I'm sort of hearing is maybe like the whole goal is not an earlier drought call, but to avoid going into a drought call.
Get a later call.
Yeah.
What can you do to avoid the call for as long as possible?
So you already are on this. It sounds like you're all moving in this, like that's the direction we want to go. We're not trying to make an earlier call. And based on that, I wonder if, Russ, you have a question about why the earlier was in the question that maybe we need to talk about, or if that summary of the goal for resiliency is to avoid the call, and that's the direction we're headed. And therefore, the funding mechanisms that you're sort of referring to are really about how to ensure you're financially stable and investing in those buckets that Val mentioned. She walked out right as I needed her. That's your goal, and that's sort of the strategy that the state should be looking at.
I'm good. I think we've got it. Yeah, I mean, these original kind of scoping questions were kind of meant to explore, and we got some good feedback. I think some of that thought might have been, would a call early allow you to keep water somewhere rather than taking it? But I think what we heard a lot about, and kind of to conversations that we've already had with some of the task force members, it's more about flexibility or the long-term investment than it is maybe what you're doing in a single year.
So as a group, any other, I mean, those were sort of our key questions. I feel like I sort of dominated the conversation here, but
can I ask a question? I'm wondering where water budgets plays into this conversation. We've talked a fair amount about them, but seems like that's best practice. I recognize it's harder for some communities to institute those, but seems like that's best practice for not only drought or water shortage management, because you can get more precise by using a percentage. And it's also probably best practice for, normal condition water demand management. If you have that ability, more flexibility, more equity. Seems like a lot of the conversations we've been having point to that being a preferred method if a community can do that. It can be more challenging. We've been challenged by that, but are hoping to move into that direction.
Thoughts from all of you?
The water budgets are also more fair. And you are asking an individual resident to cut back 15%, right? If you have a large lot and a large landscape, that 15% is going to be the same, like pain, quote unquote, but it'll be more water off a larger landscape than it would be off a smaller landscape. But it's, fair in that context.
I think it also gives customers and landscape professionals a clear target to understand what they're managing towards. And if they choose to, they could, get to that number in a lot of different ways, So in some ways, I feel like that's the right swim lane for a water provider, is to say, here's what we can provide you. Do with it what you will. I feel like it's the right way to move.
I think so.
Is anybody using that in their water shortage plans or drought plans, a budget based?
Greeley has both water budgets and a drought response plan. It's based on.
Our water budget rate structure is not directly tied to, it's just, we do every day. I don't know. We're really trying, I think, really trying to shift the culture, shift the perception. And, that ties directly back more to our landscape and irrigation criteria than it does to our drought response. And so, we have them, we're refining them, we're updating them and trying to keep them current, but it's not easy. It's a lift, no doubt.
Is your water shortage plan though then very prescriptive, like can't do this on stage 1, can't do this in stage 2, or is it like, use 10% less in the home, use 10% less in
No, that would be too general. Yeah, and it's more prescriptive in the sense of, for example, we have watering restrictions in place. We go every third day, and we've done that since 1985. So, that's just a way of life. And so if we ever get to the point of enacting drought restrictions, I forget how it's read, but maybe someone, Marjo, maybe you've read our plan more recently than I have, but it probably says something like, okay, well, under normal conditions, it's every third day. So then maybe under stage 1, it's going to be, drop to 1 or 2 days a week. And then maybe under the next stage, it's going to be, okay, no outdoor irrigation at all. It would be incrementally decreasing depending on the severity of the drought, rather than saying, save 10%.
Does your pricing stay the same in the drought response? Like
It does. But our pricing is updated annually through our rates and fees analysis. So that's ongoing now through the end of, probably now through next month, and then they'll take it to council in December. So that'll be ready to, if there are any rates and fees adjustments, those will go into effect at the first of the year. It's typically how it happens. Yeah.
Is it not a common practice that like a board or a council could override those rates at any time depending on drought conditions? I know that's a caveat. Grand Valley wide.
Yeah.
Western Slope is like, these are our rates unless act of nature happens and we have to adjust. It could be up to this much.
I suppose that could be.
Yeah.
I can't give you the right answer because I don't know, but it could be.
Typically, when you do a rates change, though, often municipal providers have to notice them. You have to publish an ordinance, and there's a 90-day, period. And I thought that was actually where Russ was going, was how can you do that faster if you wanted to impose like a drought surcharge?
I can tell you, okay, how can we respond faster? So we developed our current drought mitigation plan about 5 years ago. I think it was in 2018. And it was either last year or the year before, council authorized our director to have the authority. So it no longer requires an act of town council. It happens at the director level.
And they're just gonna come for you.
Not me. Not my job. But in our department, yes. So it will, our director at Castle Rock Water's department level has the ability based on prior authorization of town council.
And there's certain triggers though that
Yes.
you have to follow.
We have a water supply index that we track and it's on our website, and the water supply index is used to objectively say, okay, if it falls below this level, that triggers this. So we don't just make it up.
Sam's the king.
So last question I have for you, it's just sort of kind of going back to this question of, the more holistic approach. I know the one water is way to go it, but one water to me often seems very driven by the water side. And so in terms of, where some of the resiliency planning is occurring and the adaptation plans and sustainability plans and Office of Resiliency and all of the other types of planning. In thinking about how we bring these different groups together to think more thoughtfully. Are your communities also doing those plans, and are they completely divorced from each other? And that's an area of opportunity to try to really think about how to align, because that's all state funding, to align how that happens. See heads nodding.
That thin sliver of overlap for us, the folks that are working on resilience planning and then water conservation and other water practitioners. There's some of it that's happening, concurrently siloed, and then there's some projects and work that's happening with more collaboration. We've made some improvements, but there's definitely a lot of room for opportunity.
In Westminster, we have what you'd call like a traditional sustainability office, which is in our city manager's office, and they focus on energy and water and trash and recycling, and they do it for residential and business customers. And so I chat with them every once in a while when they're putting together their sustainability plan goals, which is not the same as the water efficiency goal plan, which is not the same, so it is certainly siloed. And then we also have in our fire department, we have our emergency management person who does like all the disaster response planning. And, that's not coordinated with our drought plan or, sustainability office. So there's like 3 separate people, at least there in Westminster, that are doing this kind of reliability, resiliency stuff.
Same way we've spent, 2 decades breaking down land use and water, we need to break down resiliency planning and sustainability adaptation and water. Okay, interesting. I see a lot of heads nodding on that one. So any final thoughts, recommendations to CWCB on sort of this notion of, drought planning and the innovation, creativity, and directions it needs to go before we wrap up for the day?
I think that
oh, good.
We might need to clearly illuminate the benefits to the general population of Colorado around this work. So there's not a perception or a fear of loss. I think it needs to be encapsulated as what we're offering that will be an improvement over what's new. So there's a lot of people working outside of our sphere hear what we're doing, and they're resistant, they're nervous, there's suspicion around this effort. So I think we need to be careful around the marketing and messaging. You might know that we're embarking on a water messaging initiative that we've been working on for some time. We've interviewed different cities and other allottees. So we want to make sure we're telling the right story to the general population around this work. And I want to echo what Esther said earlier around the Colorado-scape terminology. We heard the governor's Water Congress, and we're listening to see if that is an appropriate and universalized term that we're going to adopt. I paid a lot of attention to what Rick's done on his website, listening to others, and I'm wondering if water-wise landscape or Colorado landscape will be a part of this. Obviously, none of us have read the draft yet, but there's benefit to having shared terminology. And so I'm really curious. You might know that ALCC, the Associated Landscape Contractors of Colorado, will be having their fall forum here next week. A couple of us are attending. I believe that ALCC will be looking to get buy-in from its leadership entities around perhaps the term Colorado-scape. I'm not sure about that, but if that comes to fruition, there's a chance for us to agree on something that can help tell the story to our immediate audience, but then to the general population as well. So I just want to put that out there.
Interesting one. And just a quick follow-up on that. Just bringing it back, our very first meeting when we asked, what's your vision for the future? I took that and sort of borrowed some of the terminology that came out of that, because you guys defined something that was a vision for the future that was not just defined by water efficiency nor by plant types. It was really defined more by functionality of landscapes. It took more of a holistic ecological perspective, and it was really cool for me as someone who comes from that sort of perspective, that maybe the transition that you're moving towards is not just we need to adapt irrigation because we're just trying to save some water, but we're really trying to achieve some ecological health perspectives that can create these multiple benefits that create future resiliency. And maybe Colorado Scapes does that. But it was really neat what you guys did in that first meeting. So, all right, Russ. And then you'll close.
So I think we got there. I just wanted to say with our last time, I mean, tying this back to the landscapes and the turf piece is something I'm eager to hear about, and that can be stuff that you add into comments too if you feel like it's not captured correctly there. But and then Lisa, I just wanted to comment at it. I actually had kind of been thinking about this not as a drought surcharge but almost as a drought pre-charge and that could allow you some flexibility, and hearing Rick is such a good caution that even in wet years you could be in a almost a drought-like situation just in terms of making revenue. And it strikes me too that some of that resiliency funding could even be for when your planning doesn't align with just the weather. So you take down your reservoir to do some maintenance and then you end up in a drought year the next year. That's not, maybe everybody's in the same boat there, but you're probably disproportionately impacted in that case. So anyway, good conversation all around. Thank you all so much. It's really, really great.
Over to you.
Yeah, I don't have a lot. We might actually get out of here early, which is fun, avoid some traffic. I want to just start because it's our last time in person. I know we'll be meeting again virtually, but I like to say thank yous in person. So first, thank you to Marjo for your diligent work, your summarizing that made it a lot easier to pull things out throughout the entire process. I want to thank Russ and Kat. Kat had to leave early, but just for everything that they've put on behind the scenes and also in person, and all the support that they've been doing. So I'll say thank you from me, but I assume thank you from all of you as well. And then to our hosts, Frank and Rick, thank you for having us in your facilities. It was very much appreciated. And all the presenters throughout this whole process, I'm not going to list them all. But they are listed on the report, so everyone will have that information. And then just again, all of you for your effort, your time, your thoughtfulness, your guidance through all of this. It's been very eye-opening and wonderful to experience and be part of. And we kind of just want to leave a bit on the reverse side of how we started when we were going around asking about, as Marjo just referenced, the values and visions. So just, if you don't want to answer, you don't have to, but just going around and saying what you hope for out of all the work that we're doing, but also what you fear, and thinking about that as we go into the editing process, so you can use that lens and think, if I have this hope, if I have this fear, how can we actually frame this going forward? So we gave you no time to think about this. And again, if you don't want to answer, you don't have to. If you want to email me in 3 weeks, 2 in the morning, because it came to your head, that's what I do. So I'll start with Frank because you're hosting.
The question was what we hope for and what we fear.
Just the general work that we've been doing.
Well, I hope that we'll have some uniform agreement around the content of this, that it will be seen as a worthwhile effort from everybody's time and investment, and that it will be the foundation of a lot of our work plans going forward. I think we share information informally, and that's part of the benefit of working together in person and through all these other opportunities. I also hope it gives us the chance that we don't have to fear that less water means less livability. I think it's a very human reaction. The reason we like green things is because green means verdant and living, right? And non-green things has, I think, an instilled humanistic response to like sickness or poverty or other things that are not as exciting to us. So I think we're trying to thread a really difficult conversation by doing more with less and making beautiful a whole redefinition. I also hope for the opportunity to appreciate the private sector partner in the room. I'm just going to point out, Patrick's taken his time here and participated, and it's really important that we see them as a partner and not the enemy, and not somebody who's told what to do, but can work alongside that. So. And I also fear that we won't have enough time to do all this really well, that all of a sudden it'll be like 7 months of pure drought, and that'll just force us to move faster. So.
I don't really want to go after Frank. Yeah, I just hope we've hit on all the really key priority topics because this is huge. But I appreciate we'll have the opportunity to go through the report, and if there are things missing, that are pretty significant, if they get fleshed out sufficiently. And then it's not really a fear, but I also hope that the recommendations that come out are not they're not too general, right? To just kind of set the stage for another round of work that needs to happen. Like, for example, saying we want to change the terminology. Like, did we land on a term? So then it's like, sweet, now there's this whole terminology conversation that needs to have things like that. I sort of hope that to the extent we can wrap things up and come forth with real distinct recommendations, I think that would be great. Really be beneficial.
And Laura and Frank, I just want to maybe reframe this question before we all go around, but I think what I was hoping for is we had such a beautiful conversation when we had our first meeting about what a resilient future looked like. And all these comments are great, and there's stuff you're going to tell us when you read the report. But I think what I'm most curious about is, what are the fears if we don't realize this future that we've laid out in the water plan? What if we don't meet our climate adaptive future? What does that mean? And what are our hopes that, for realizing that? I don't know if that, maybe it fit in the context of what you said, but I thought I would give you guys the chance to add on to that.
Hey, let's continue around.
Definitely echo what you both started with. I'm hopeful that, again, this does create that consistent terminology and language. I'm hopeful that we all continue to work together as a network and share information and lessons learned. I think my fear for a lot of this has always been like, I think people are eager to do this work, but they don't know where to start. And my fear is that everyone's going to try to move forward. And we're already seeing that, again, with the private sector not keeping up with the pace, that some of these things are going to fail, and that's okay. But we need to start somewhere. But then I'm also worried that the failure is going to lead to change in the public perception around these being the kind of landscapes that they want to embrace. And that's something we're really trying to think about, how we're going to manage those expectations. And again, the communication around this transition doesn't happen overnight, and it does take 2 to 3 years to be what we're all trying to illustrate and is aesthetically pleasing. So those are kind of my thoughts.
I'll keep it short, echo everything that's been said here. I think one hope is that I think this is aside from coming together for this report, is this the beginning of, we've talked about breaking down silos today and some of the barriers to collaboration and integrated planning. And I'm hoping that this is the start of that. If we can practice amongst each other to model it within our organization. And so I think this is a very safe space for us to kind of say, hey, now got this idea, or I'm going to reach out to Drew and say, hey, Drew, I'm thinking of this. So we can hope that from this effort, we can become ambassadors or model the way of integrated planning. I don't think I have many fears. Just the one that I wanted to put out was, and it's specific to this effort, is just focusing on low-hanging fruits. That's always a fear. It's, the easy button. But I've also learned that sometimes you have to start somewhere. What we're taking on is almost like world peace. You've got to take something. And I've learned so much from this team of sometimes you have to start somewhere, and that will unravel to something more. So.
Hope this is easier than the Middle East.
I think I'm hopeful for the new introductions for maybe people who are missing from this room. I think it was a great highlight of the diversity in our state and the difference in the projects that everybody is already individually partaking on. But I'm hopeful that it'll lead to some more people emerging and saying like, hey, saw you were part of this task force. Like, I'd love to talk to you about XYZ. I obviously fear kind of the uphill push we're going to have to do and some kind of behavioral changes and cultural shifts. Those are never easy, but I think once we get to the other side, we'll be like, wow, that was a lot better than we thought it was going to be. So a little bit of hope in that.
I was going to try to address what Russ was saying, but it's so dystopian and Hunger Games-ish. So let's just leave that. We'll park that for now. My hope is that we create a living document that is embraced. And embraced, you know, it's not going to be embraced by everyone, but most folks. My fear, though, is that lowest common denominator frame of mind, we want everyone to embrace this, is going to prevent us from doing, and I think, Laura, this is where you were going, like something really significant and innovative and new, because that's the flip side of perhaps not being embraced by everyone. So it's a really fine line to walk, I think. But the other part, I hope, is that this isn't, you know, Doug, when you said, oh, and there will be an update, and this probably won't be the last update, there'll be another update. You know, this can't stop. This can't stop with a report in January. It has to keep going in some form or function. So I'm very hopeful that we can do that.
My hope is that we see some progress from this report, that it kind of greases the wheels for efforts, either for those that are in this room or other communities that might take advantage of the report. And I will go to the dystopian place to answer Russ's question, because we're in the process of updating our water efficiency plans. So we're thinking about population growth and climate impacts and all these things. And my real fear, if we have a less resilient future, if we don't have the opportunity to be more resilient in the future, is that it'll be a major degradation to our quality of life. Water impacts us in so many different ways, and the likelihood of it having very different impacts for different groups is also kind of a scary thought. So there, I want to say. That's good. I'm glad somebody did.
Yeah, he gave you a thumbs up.
Yeah, for me, I think I'm just really hopeful. I was really surprised how much common ground there was, and from our first meeting where people really shared the values of living landscapes and wanting to ensure that our water is stewarded well and having really great quality of life. So I think that's a really firm foundation from which to collaborate further. And I guess thinking back to a conversation you and I had, Laura, I really hope that we can continue collaboration with a healthy tension between needing to move and to think big, and also with doing some things that are just pretty routine and standard and making incremental progress, because I think that both are valid approaches. And we're going to need to partner with each other to do both. So continuing collaboration with a healthy tension would be my hope.
Yeah, my thoughts are definitely aligned with what a lot of people have said already. I think my hope and fear are the same sides, or the opposite sides of the same coin. I really hope something happens as a result of this. I really fear that this sits on the shelf and nothing happens. And maybe as a specific example of that, as an action that the legislature could take, they're probably going to want to do something. I hope they do something that's good, that is worthwhile, that actually changes, and they don't pick something that's like so grandiose and awful that it like just puts a bad taste in everyone's mouth and makes it permanently impossible to make any progress in the future.
Fine. It's not official yet.
I actually kind of have the same fear Drew does. I hope that we create a document that people take advantage of, or people realize that this is something we should do because we have to. My fear is that we create something that is scary and is not achievable, and henceforth nobody does it because it's too challenging to do. I think sometimes we have a tendency to overthink things. And I just hope we create something that is easy to follow.
I just work here.
I think my hope is that, like everybody else, we continue to move forward with some kind of like unity and cohesion between all of our different organizations. And also hopefully some new life brought back into our urban forest and urban environments. My fear is also similar, that we create something really incredible, great recommendations, and then there's no action taken, because it seems like there is a difference sometimes between what people say they want and then what actually happens.
Fair enough. So I think a couple thoughts. One, I hope, as several of us have mentioned, that this does serve as a call to action. And I say that because that leads into my fear, which is similar to what Drew sort of introduced. You know, for decades, I've been involved in groups that have seemingly agreed on, hey, we want this, or we want this, whatever that particular group is discussing. And then nothing comes out of it. And I think one of the reasons that nothing comes out of it oftentimes is, and people will admit this pretty freely, nobody wants to be the first one through the door. Nobody, you know, historically, first one through on any initiative is the bloodiest, and nobody wants to do that. And so that's my fear, is similar to what others have expressed, is, you know, there's been a lot of great ideas, wonderful ideas. And beyond that, I really value, you know, meeting some folks in here that prior to this group I didn't know. And so to you guys that are new to my world, thank you, because that's great. And to summarize, I'm going to suggest that we have settled on a term. It is Coloradoscape. And let's just stop talking about it and do it. How's that?
That's the slogan.
We settled on a definition and the components then, right?
No.
Okay. All right, so we'll go online, Waverly.
Sorry for that delay there. You know, I think my biggest hope is that arising out of this process, we will have catalyzed some action and movement, and really identified some keys that can help us unlock the state's movement sort of to become successively more successful in our desire to reduce water use and achieve all of the objectives that we made explicit in the first session that we had around what we want our landscapes to look like. I think my fear would be sometimes moving forward so quickly on the strategies and the opportunities that we forget to bring along with us the story of like how this links with our state and our local government's values and our goals and the things that are meaningful to us and what we want to protect. So I guess that would be my fear. And also, you know, what everyone in the room has said, going too slowly versus going really quickly and kind of not being successful. So finding that right balance is important.
Right.
Yeah, not much new to say. I definitely agree with everybody. I do think we need to act with some amount of urgency. I mean, this is a funny thing. Conservation takes so long that, you know, we just want to get ahead of this. And so thinking really broadly, my hope is that we can really we can position Colorado as being one of the leaders in adapting to climate change. And I think changing landscapes here can sort of put us out front, outside of the energy sector, of course. Another hope, and I think I have a lot of hope. I'm feeling less dark maybe than others. I think we're going to get this done. One thing that I think we really need to do is make a direct connection back to our customers and really talk about the benefits we're bringing to them. Sometimes I think when we talk as groups like this, I think we get a little wonky in terms of like acre feet of savings and, you know, what it does for the larger systems. But I think our customers need to know like the environmental and social benefits that this landscape change will bring to them. Thanks again. I couldn't be happier with this group and everything we've done. Thanks for letting me be part of it.
And I think the last person would be Adam.
I mean, you all did such a great job already. I I'll kind of echo that same thing. My first month on the job 11 years ago now was going to a meeting of Front Range Utilities talking about similar stuff. So kind of to echo some of the comments that this actually gets some momentum. I would hope to see some cohesion at the state level so that we're all kind of marching in step on some of these things. And partly to Greg's point, to get people to understand what living in Colorado means in the water context and what they have to do. My fears, as I kind of look at this summer in particular, a lot of communities and parts of the world that are dealing with these initial forays of climate change and to the extreme level, I would imagine a lot of them get caught into a triage situation where they're making relatively rushed decisions that aren't necessarily wise, or, they're not the best option forward. And the things that we kind of take a cautious approach to sometimes, those get thrown out the window when you're just trying to survive. So I hope we do enough before those moments kind of hit Colorado.
So, all right. Well, with that, we'll end on a hopeful note. Not the, oh God, we're in triage note. Thank you for your time today and everyone. Safe. And have fun reading the report.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you.